Hello, hello. What's up, everyone? This is still not live. Unless it's started up on another stream here. There I am. Good. You would not believe the speed at which I just ate my lunch in order to make the arbitrary start time that I put in OBS. But I see there are 0 people here, so that was worthwhile. I'm gonna watch Edie, who is the founder of the Animal Law Foundation. She's a lawyer, as you might imagine. And she spoke to Earthling Ed, which is very cool. But before we get into that, why don't we do a little bit of Fast Action Network? Oh, whoops. Oh, that could have been worse. Okay, new campaign launch on Fast Action Network. Unilever. The Unilever campaign launches today. Unilever's decision to revoke its global cage-free commitment leaves millions of hens trapped in cages. So they had a cage-free commitment and they have decided to sack it off. Cage-free for the West, animal cruelty for the rest. Okay, so this is like the rest of the markets. I guess outside of the US and Europe, maybe. We're calling on this manufacturing giant to reinstate its global cage-free commitment and publish a clear plan to reach 100% cage-free worldwide. Take action now to demand accountability and real change for hens. Let's go. We'll do a little bit of Fast Action Network. I've got some news articles as well that we can have a look at. And then we'll watch the Earthling Head interview. We gotta put in the work first. We're on a 5-week streak for the Fast Action Network. I think this will make it 6. Nice. A-hole Delhaze. We've been at them for a little while. I was trying to remember what their brands are. They're all American brands, to be fair. Giant Food, the Giant Company, Stop and Shop, Food Lion. Because somebody asked me about this the other day and I couldn't think of any of them. But they're all American, to be fair. So we're watching Edie Valves on Earthling Ed very shortly. But we're just going to... Oh, let's lose the M dash. Look at that. That's ChatGPT-ified. So we'll lose that. Bit of Fast Action Network before we get into it today. And we'll read a bit of news as well. I've got some good news things lined up. The streaming, honestly, is always a good opportunity to read the things that I've been meaning to read. A good excuse to do it. What's going on with negative comments on Unilever's animal welfare? It doesn't look good. They can have a bit of that on LinkedIn. New campaign from today. Fast Action Network, Unilever. They had a global cage-free commitment and they've decided to sack it off, so we are going to give them some trouble. I always like the one that's aimed at particular people. Karen Mitchell, the Chief Marketing Officer at Stop and Shop. Imagine you're one of these people, you're just like some suit, and then all of a sudden you get a ton of people commenting on your shit. Everyone does it without tagging properly. Oh, there's my man Tristan King. We know this guy. Verified Chris Bryant viewer. I love that. It's so good to see people. I'm pretty sure this guy commented that he discovered the Fast Action Network from my channel, so it's really cool to see that he's into it. Any other Fast Action Networkers? Let me put the link in the chat. action.thehumaneleague.org. I'm sure everybody knows this by now. Radisson Blue. We've been going after Radisson for a little while as well. Man, it's so gratifying when one of these works. We saw the Subway campaign victory last year. Are we going to see any more? What's this one? Panda Express. Yeah, this is another one that we've been doing for a little while. And another individual, Roland Ornelas, Chief Supply Chain Officer. Well, that certainly seems to be the person to go after. Often these people don't have any of their own posts on LinkedIn. They're just reposting stuff. Which, if you comment on that, it just goes to the original post. Ah, here we go. This is this person's last post under his own account. Boom, have some of that. He's celebrating something. Being named to the 2018 Food Logistics Champions Rock Stars of the Supply Chain list. Wow. God, some of the stuff they have to do to make corporate jobs interesting. Rock stars of the supply chain. I mean, it's pretty cringe, isn't it? But clearly this person's proud of that, and hopefully we piss on his bonfire a little bit by pointing out Panda Express's failures on animal welfare. Hellman's? This is a new one, right? Oh, this is a Unilever brand. Okay, of course. Sign this petition against Unilever. Mix it up a little bit. We only had Facebook and LinkedIn so far. Right, we'll do a few more of these guys, and then we'll get into the news. Yes, tell me if we win. Hello? Alright, that's weird. Boom. Up to 380 points. Let's go to 385, and then we'll do some news, and then we'll get on to the Earthling Ed video. Action.thehumaneleague.org, guys. I would love to see more of you over there, giving these companies a hard time. It is pretty shocking, really. It is pretty shocking the way they're behaving, a lot of these companies. So Unilever had a global cage-free commitment, and they've just decided to sack it off. Which is not very cool. So we'll do one more of these. Oh, whoops. Completed. Do we have any more? Oh, yes, we do have some more. Contact form. I won't do that because it tends to dox me with the autocomplete. All right, let's do the. I always skip. Well, you mustn't skip the Facebook ones. You're not allowed. They're not allowed to give you points for the Facebook ones, but that is not in the spirit of the game. Real ones do the Facebook ones as well. Yeah, bollocks to you, Giant. Giantbetrayal.com. Right, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. Email. All right, last one, guys, and then we will have a little look at the news, and then we'll get to watching Earthling Ed. Lovely. All right, then let me get dragged into my actual emails here, lest I do any work. I'm not going to lie, I've actually been a machine in the last couple of days. I've done hella work. I've been doing the work streams where I just have the camera on my face with the music on in the background, and I'm literally just grinding, doing emails, doing reports. It's obviously very boring viewing. Let's see if we got anything juicy going on LinkedIn real quick. Actually, this is a good little comment thread. We can have a read of this later. A plant-based meat post, you know it's going to attract some troglodytes. And indeed it did. Well, you know, the post is pro plant-based meat, which is very based. Is talking, well, why plant-based meat has so many ingredients and why that's not a problem. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the dumbest ultra-processed food talking points, like too many ingredients. It's like, you can have a salad and add capers to your lettuce and tomatoes and cucumber, and by this logic it will make it less healthy. But this was a good post. This was defending, or yeah, I guess defending plant-based meat. 170 likes. This guy's done well. 140 comments though. A lot of them were negative. I commented, so true, and we can skip a lot of the weak evidence, ultra-processed discourse and look directly at systematic reviews which show consistently better health markers for those consuming plant-based meat versus meat. And this is the guy that I'm going to debate. I need to get this set up, actually. I have a DM from him currently. This is a very ChatGPT'd comment. We had the whole thing of the meatheads posting ChatGPT copy-paste comments. And this was another one of them. There's a couple of giveaways that I noticed in here. Someone in my Discord earlier said it's not X, it's Y, is a classic marker, which is very true. It looks like they've got the ChatGPT and maybe modified the output a little bit. Consistently better health markers is a marketing headline. This review does not support that. It does, actually. Paper's own conclusion is short-term substitution of PVMAs in adults without CVD, with modest changes in TC, LDL, and body weight. Explicitly says long-term studies are needed. Yeah, this does not refute what I said. That's not plant meat good, real meat bad. That's swap X for Y, and LDL moves a bit, which is a proxy endpoint, not cardiometabolic outcomes or mortality. Yeah, I've been getting this a lot lately. People doing the actual quote marks around things that I haven't said. In fairness, in this case, it's a closer approximation. I like that he says swap X for Y here. Why don't we say what X and Y are, right? It was swap meat for plant-based meat. And LDL cholesterol reduces. A proxy endpoint. Yeah, well, again, I said health markers. So he's going after something that I haven't said. Also, PBMAs aren't a single food. They're a category of industrial formulations. Here's the ultra-processed banter. At least some of the foundational trials in the space have been industry gift funded. Yeah, that's not an argument against the findings or the study design. Of course, things could be industry funded and still be accurate. And, you know, when you think about it, I've never really liked the criticism of studies based on the funding solely. Because not only is that obviously not determinative whether it's a good or bad study, but it's also, to some extent, what do you expect, right? Like, there's funding to look into certain topics, and who are the people that are going to be funding those topics, or the research into those topics? Well, it's going to tend to be people who are interested in that area. Right, so it's actually not shocking. And I would say the same for meat industry funded things as well. Like, just being funded by the meat industry alone is not an indication that something is wrong or bad or incorrect, right? You have to actually criticize the methodology. You actually have to actually criticize the study. If we're following the data, the honest takeaway is short horizon, small effect sizes, surrogate markers, and unknown long-term trade-offs, not a victory lap. This is such a ChatGPT phrase. This is such a ChatGPT... the whole thing, actually, like the overuse of quote marks, including on things that I haven't quoted. Oh, I know what it was as well. The different types of quote marks. Very, very subtle tell for AI copy-paste. Or partial AI copy-paste, right? Look, here we've got the just vertical quote marks, and here we've got the slightly slanty ones. If you're just typing everything from your keyboard, obviously it's going to have the same type of quote marks, right? So this is a partial copy-paste from AI output, for sure. Which, actually, to be fair, that is much better than a complete copy-paste from AI output. I got mad at those other commenters that were just doing full copy-paste AI output because I was thinking, this is fucking pointless. Like, you're not even a part of this conversation. You're literally just copy-pasting what I'm saying, putting it into ChatGPT, and then copy-pasting the output back to me. I may as well just go talk to ChatGPT. I don't need you to be a middleman here. Right, so at least this guy's not doing that. Want to live a long and healthy life? Avoid eating the dozens of plant defense chemicals and prioritize proven human nutrients, brackets, an animal-based diet. Yeah, this is the thing that he's going to be defending in our debate. An animal-based diet, so it's a higher burden than just, like, there's not health problems from animal products, which of course there are. He's actually arguing that an primarily animal-based diet, not exclusively, as he's made clear in my DMs, but that a primarily animal-based diet would be optimal from a health perspective. So that's that'll be an interesting discussion. I said, you seem to be copy-pasting from AI output, so I'm not particularly inclined to argue with you in comments. I'll say what I've said before. Rather than reading comments from somebody prompting AI for pro-meat arguments, go and ask AI, give me an unbiased assessment of which is healthier, meat or plant-based meat. If you'd like to have a live debate on this, I'd be more than happy to set it up. Guy comes back. Which, by the way, this is a great tip. If you come across these people copy-pasting from AI, because here's the thing, right? In these interactions, you're not really trying to persuade the person, especially in this case, right? Like, this guy has the little meat emoji in his name on LinkedIn. And he has, hate seed oil and love raw milk? We'll get along great. This is LinkedIn tagline. So clearly this is not someone I'm likely to persuade in the comment section. But it's for the benefit of other people reading along, right? So there's obviously a ton of people reading this. Well, 62 impressions. This is a comment on a comment, I guess. But this is a great tip. Go and ask AI, give me an unbiased assessment of which is healthier, meat or plant-based meat. And it's going to say what I've said, that there are now at least 2 systematic reviews showing consistently better heart health markers in randomized controlled trials from people swapping out meat for plant-based meat. So this is the first shout for a debate. He comes back, he says, I absolutely use AI to understand technical documents, legal, scientific, etc. Are there actually people who don't? That's not what I said. And yeah, by the way, it's worth reiterating, I think it's totally fine to use AI for the purpose that he's describing here. Like to ask AI about a paper if you're trying to understand it, even upload the paper to AI platforms and use that, right? What I don't appreciate is people just copy-pasting AI output and wasting my time, basically, right? But then maybe we should just be doing that back. He says, no, I don't copy-paste and let AI think for me. For better or worse, the world is stuck with my wetware as the permanent filter. So again, we've got the different types of quote marks up here. So he certainly has copy-pasted AI. Although again, like I'm not that mad about it. He does... The inconsistency here is actually an indication that he's at least written some of it himself. So that is tons better than just copy-pasting the whole thing, which is when I just feel like this is a complete waste of my time. Live debate? What is there even to debate? I like fair fights. I mean, what does that mean? Clearly, we could debate the thing that we're currently arguing about. And in what sense would this be an unfair fight? I mean, apart from the fact that you're very clearly wrong. Every fake meat company has failed to achieve any sort of market success due to the inherent dangerous, unhealthy, and unsatiating, brackets unsatisfying. This is a nice... I don't know why that was necessary. Nature of UPF and plant-based defense chemicals. Yeah, this is... bollocks, and kind of a change of subject as well. Like he's talking about the market success. This is just a completely different topic. To be fair, he goes on to say, due to the inherent dangerous, unhealthy, and unsatiating, brackets unsatisfying nature. All right, so I mean, in fairness, you could make a case that the propaganda about ultra-processed foods with respect to plant-based meats has indeed hurt their market penetration. But it's not because they're actually unhealthy, it's just because vibes. Right, ultra-processed foods and vibes. So exactly the kind of banter that this guy's given me here. This burger, image courtesy of ChatGPT, irony not lost on me, is simply the latest miracle product that will be declaring bankruptcy in a few years. Even Bill Gates himself could not stop Beyond Burgers from failing. I mean, Beyond Burgers is still around, so... And, yeah, so here he's pointing the original post, which is not my post. This is an AI image, allegedly. I think it probably is, to be fair, has that kind of vibe. And also, to be fair, I think the text has kind of an AI vibe as well. But whatever. I mean, again, it's not... my problem is with people copy-pasting directly and just wasting time with arguments, because I just think, well, I may as well go argue with AI directly. Also, this is not my post, so I don't... It's, so what, right? I said I have no problem with using AI to understand things or even to write things, but you are just prompting to get pro-meat answers, which you're then copy-pasting. See 2 different types of quote marks in your previous comments. Fortunately, anybody can now go and ask AI for an unbiased assessment, and it's going to tell you that plant-based meat is healthier. Since you seem to think there is a debate about which is healthier, I'd love to talk about it live. So this is kind of influenced by the article we read the other day about AI futures, where intelligence and information processing is no longer a scarce resource. Everyone has access to ChatGPT, right? It's not, this is very clever if you're the only person in the world who has ChatGPT. But as soon as you realize everyone else also has access to ChatGPT, it's very not clever. So this is one of the reasons why I tend towards live debates now, and obviously it's content. But yeah, I think it's easier to, I guess that people can still use ChatGPT in live debate. I've seen it done, but it's a little bit difficult to do. It's a little bit more difficult to do it without detection. Even then, ultimately, the point of a debate is not going to be prove whether I know more or this guy knows more. Right? It's not going to be a competition as to which of us is more able to articulate our points without reference to ChatGPT. The point of the debate is to get to the fact of the matter. So, frankly, if AI can help us do that, then let's do it, right? I wouldn't say Google's banned, right? I wouldn't say you're not allowed to look stuff up. Like, we're trying to get to an agreement about what is the correct thing here. So if that entails using AI to some extent, that's fair enough as far as I'm concerned. Now, it might reveal a lack of background knowledge if you are leaning on AI very heavily, particularly in a live conversation about these things, or if you're, encountering something that you don't know about and having to look it up. Again, that's not going to be determinative that you're wrong or that you've lost the debate, but it is going to be an indication that you are speaking with too much confidence on a topic which perhaps you should be more modest on. And this is where we get the nibble. Incorrect, he says. If you'd like the live debate, I'm assuming means, we could also debate live. If you'd like the live debate, feel free to DM me. The public text debate here is pretty well resolved. Yeah. I don't know about that one, Chief. So I DM'd him, I said, excellent, I just added you, let's DM to set up a debate. Fair play to you for being in the less than 10% who don't run from debate, like my friend Lauren. Another commenter on here, this was actually someone in the last ChatGPT comment copy-paste video that I did. And they're referenced in another comment here, which I'll read in a second. But yeah, fair play to him, all right? He's ostensibly open to having a debate, so I said, fair play to you for not being someone who runs away from it. He says, same compliment right back to you, if we're being honest. I'll reply to your DM shortly. Enjoy your weekend, friend. Pretty nice conclusion, right? Pretty friendly. This guy actually also commented on my latest post, my rather genius analogy that I posted yesterday. Believing that plant-based meat is unhealthy because it's ultra-processed is like believing that bicycles are bad for the planet because they're vehicles. And he commented, like, quite a friendly post, but I couldn't quite like it. He said, this is an excellent point, frankly. I do believe that plant-based meat is unhealthy for many reasons, but logically this isn't a good argument against it. Very well said. This guy is being nice. I always wanted to like that comment, but I didn't agree with this middle part. I don't want to go back and forth too much here, so but we'll get the debate booked in. That's probably going to be in a couple of weeks, that debate. He's given me a decently detailed outline of his positions. Like I said, he's advocating for an animal-based diet, or not strictly carnivore, but I guess like the majority of food or the majority of calories coming from animal sources is going to be his position. And there was also some religious stuff in there as well, which he said we can include that or not if up to my preference. So I don't know, maybe I'll entertain that. Could be interesting. But here, this is a good ready-made graphic which I post on a lot of things with ultra-processed discourse for plant-based meats. We've got stronger evidence at the top, weaker evidence at the bottom. And the weakest evidence down here, mechanistic speculation. Ultra-processing, bioavailability, nutrient density. These are some proposed mechanisms by which plant-based meat could be unhealthy compared to meat. And these are basically the main talking points of people who speak against plant-based meat, right? It's ultra-processed food, meat has nutrient density, meat has better bioavailability. And the implication is, because of these characteristics, meat is going to be healthier than plant-based meat. But it's actually not the case. This is the weakest evidence around. These are basically stories about why this might be the case. But why don't we look at some actual evidence to do with health outcomes? Vegans have better health outcomes than meat eaters when observed in large cohorts over time. A lot of these meatheads like to cry about epidemiological evidence. They're all very well equipped with the talking points against epidemiology, as we saw in the Paul Wood debate. And often the irony is not lost on them that they are appealing to weaker evidence in the form of mechanistic speculation, which is completely overridden by epidemiological evidence. So this is not that obvious. Okay, this is to do with the hierarchy of evidence. They're speaking about mechanistic speculation, which is the weakest form of evidence here. And they want to say epidemiology is weak evidence, but completely ignore the fact that they're appealing to even weaker evidence in this. Right, so epidemiology is not the strongest evidence, but it is certainly stronger than mechanistic speculation. And actually in the prep for the Paul Wood debate, I came across something, I think it was in the Uproot Nutrition Discord. Somebody there tipped me off about a few of these talking points, or it might have been in Avi's Discord, that epidemiology converges, I think it's something like 85% with randomized control trials. Right, so randomized control trials, experimental evidence is the strongest form shown here. People randomly assigned to eat plant-based meat instead of meat have lower cholesterol, lower body weight, and no difference in muscle growth. So this is even stronger evidence than epidemiology, because in epidemiology, you can have confounding factors, right? There might be other, like healthy user bias. Maybe vegans are just healthier in general. Maybe they exercise more and smoke less and things like this. But actually in experimental evidence, right, when you either randomly allocate people to one or the other, or you have like a crossover trial where you have a period of eating one, then a period of eating the other, all of those confounds are controlled for. So experimental evidence is going to be the strongest form of evidence shown here. And indeed, these stronger forms of evidence favour the view that plant-based meat is healthier, than meat from animals. So perhaps I'll link this so that people can use it. Or, you know what, I'm going to post this in my Discord at dsc.gg/ChrisBryantPhD. And well, here's my LinkedIn, actually. You can go and find this, because this is a good graphic to post at people who are doing this meat is healthier kind of nonsense with the ultra-processed and the nutrient density and so on. And let me see, is this... Okay, yeah. Well, we're missing some comments here because the person blocked me. But their name's Lauren Dyer. She had commented something, I'm sure, devastatingly sassy, which prompted my reply to say, you're the person who was copy-pasting from ChatGPT before, and I suspect you're doing it again here. For that reason, I don't feel compelled to argue with you in the comments, but if you'd like to have a live debate, let me know, and I'd be happy to set it up. They Well, oh yeah, it must be at this point that they blocked me, so I can't see their replies now. But I thought I would comment again. The point here is to appeal to people who are reading the comments, not to the person directly who's, very invested in their views. I said, evidently Lauren Dyer has decided to block me rather than A, deny that she's copy-pasting AI output, or B, engage with my offer to have a live debate. You, reader, can decide for yourself whether you think that's the behaviour of someone who's confident in their argument, or the behaviour of someone copy-pasting from AI to give them the illusion of competence. Rather than have discussion with someone prompting an AI for pro-meat arguments, go and ask AI yourself, give me an unbiased assessment of which is healthier, meat or plant-based meat. Right, so same tactic here. When people are doing the AI copy-paste thing, you go, hang on a minute. We've all got access to AI. I've got access to AI, and the people reading this have got access to AI. So rather than just reading your copy-paste, why don't they just go and ask? And they will get the answer that I'm saying, which is the strongest evidence we have suggests that plant-based meat's healthier. Not pictured here, by the way, is systematic reviews, which would be even stronger evidence. Right, experimental evidence, then we've got 2 systematic reviews of experimental studies which support the position that plant-based meat's healthier than meat. So this graphic, Mogs, Meatheads Stay Mad, and we are going to get the debate set up with this guy, Matt Achtung. He looks like a great villain, by the way. His last name means danger in German. You couldn't make it up. He's got the meat emoji in the LinkedIn name. Hate seed oil and love raw milk. Oh, brother. So, yeah, this will be the next debate on the channel. Probably going to be in a couple of weeks. And, yeah, I'll set it up live. I'll share details of when you can expect that. Now, I have a bunch of news articles up here, which we could have a look at. But since I already talked you guys' ear off with the latest LinkedIn drama, why don't we get into Earthling Ed? Earthling Ed speaking to Edie Bowles, who is a lawyer, the founder and director of the Animal Law Foundation, and she's doing a ton of cool stuff. Again, this is someone that I know. I've met Edie. She works very centrally in the animal movement in UK politics. I've met her at parliamentary events. We went to that little pub down the road from Parliament, is it the Red Lion? The one close to UK Parliament? And yeah, she's one of these extremely self-driven, innovative, explorative people who is just looking for ways to help animals via existing UK laws. And there's some surprising, I don't know if it's fair to call them low-hanging fruit, but good opportunities that already exist with our current laws that can be used and just enforced properly to really help a lot of animals. So we're going to hear a bit about them here from Edie. This is just out about a week ago on Earthling Ed's channel. Let's get into it.
Hello and welcome to the Disclosure Podcast. If you enjoy this episode, then please consider checking out my Substack where I post regular articles. If you'd like to support the podcast or my work more generally, then you can also become a paid member of my Substack, through which you will gain access to weekly articles, or alternatively, you can support my work by making a donation through my website. If you do choose to support my work, then thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I didn't know you had a Substack. That's cool. We will check that out. Must have links down here, right? We will check that out. Why do meat eaters send vegans images of meat? Yeah, that's a classic. Oh, look at this young Ed. "2017, my first time on live TV." It looks, he's definitely gone more handsome, don't you think?
I'm not quite sure how to help you with that.
Pardon me, Alexa kicking off in the background. Look at that, then and now. Aura maxing lately. Like the stream, guys. Give a comment, come in chat, say hello. We get some more people in here while we're watching.
And I am incredibly grateful. In the description, you can also find links to purchase my books and to find out more about today's guest. And to stay up to date with all of my latest uploads, then please consider subscribing to my channel and clicking the notification bell. I hope you find this episode interesting and informative, and thank you for watching. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Disclosure Podcast. On today's episode, I'm thrilled to be joined by Edie Bowles. Edie is the co-founder of Advocates for Animals, which is the UK's first animal...
What's up, Poe? Good to see you. Oh, he's saying bowls. I'm saying bowels. Bowls sounds nicer.
...protection law firm, and is the founder of the Animal Law Foundation, which is a charity...
It can't be bowels, as if I've been calling you Edie Bowles. All right, no one tell her.
...that advocates and researches for better enforcement and interpretation of animal protection laws. Edie started her career in intellectual property law before marrying her partner.
Hey, if you didn't know, I'm going to be on this podcast. I recorded an Earthling Ed podcast probably like a year ago, but I guess it takes a while to get them out. So I don't know when that's going to come out, but at some point I'll be on Earthling Ed, which would be cool.
Protection laws. Edie started her career in intellectual property law before marrying her passion for law with her passion for animal protection. And before working in the current organizations that she currently works for, Edie was a solicitor for several years with Cruelty Free International. So, Edie, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, my absolute pleasure. We've known each other for a number of years. I think we met back in 2018, was it? Or
yeah, I mean, you'll always be very kind of instrumental in the journey, because we had, of course, our launch party for one of my ventures, Advocates for Animals. We had our launch party at Unity Diner.
That's right.
And yeah, you were there, and I remember people being starstruck, Ed.
Oh, well, you're very kind. Well, it's a real honor to have you here.
True. Is this guy the modern vegan goat? I think so, right? Is there anyone more famous, more auriful than Earthling Ed in the vegan movement today? There's a couple of contenders. Maybe Joey Carbstrong is the other big one in terms of internet personalities and activists. Anyone else that comes close? Truly the Ronaldo and Messi of animal advocacy.
Because I really admire the dedication that you put into the work that you do in a field that's notoriously difficult. And I think it's really wonderful to have someone like yourself spearheading this side of the movement, because, you know, we all approach veganism as advocates in different ways, but there's this huge side of advocacy, which is obviously the legal side, which is so crucial. And so I think it's really wonderful that you're spearheading that and you're involved in that and pushing this side of the conversation as well. And actually, on that point, maybe we could start by talking about the Animal Law Foundation. I wondered if you could maybe talk about
Gary Yourofsky. Yeah, true. He's back. More of a throwback. Who would he be in the? Oh yeah, Peter Singer as well. That's very true. These guys are like been in the game for longer. Who are they in the Messi Ronaldo analogy? They're like Maradona or someone. Peter Singer maybe.
About why you founded it and the work that you do there.
Yeah, of course. So the Animal Law Foundation actually came about as a result of the work that I do through my separate entity, Advocates for Animals. So Advocates for Animals is a law firm that represents clients from across the animal protection space, and also individuals and activists as well. And through doing that work, so we founded that organisation around 2018. And through doing that work for clients day in, day out, it became very apparent how much work there was to do.
Yeah.
And quite often through doing research on, various client projects, I'd come across a new legal problem and approach potential clients with a potential case. And sometimes they were interested, which is great. In fact, one of our really important cases to do with fast-growing chickens happened that way. Identified a case, approached the Humane League, and the Humane League thankfully wanted to take up that case. Brilliant. But there were often cases where there wasn't a potential client for lots of, really valid reasons, perhaps financial reasons or campaigning reasons. And it just felt a shame for those really important cases that could have huge implications for animals.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why it's so important to be giving to effective animal charities. And there was a law-based one in the previous round of Animal Charity Evaluators recommendations, Legal Impact for Chickens, and we spoke to the head lawyer there on the channel. But yeah, I mean, these professional services, law and other professional services which are going to be extremely valuable for projects for animals, they're expensive because if these people were not working to help animals, they've been to law school, they have law school loans to repay and salaries that they're sacrificing by not being corporate lawyers, for example. So the animal movement needs money for this important work to be done. And that's why it's so important to build up that financial base for the animal movement in strategic organisations that can really make a difference for animals and help animals.
Those really important cases that could have huge implications for animals to just fall through the cracks. And so it then became apparent that another entity was needed that could focus on researching areas of animal law and what's actually happening in practice on the ground for animals, and where necessary, bring legal interventions.
Yeah. Oh, that's terrific. And I think there's a few core issues that I wanted to discuss around sort of enforcement, the current situation in terms of what laws are on the table, what they actually mean for animals, do they make a difference, what needs to change. But I think maybe before we delve into sort of the current context around animal protection laws, maybe we sort of go back in time and maybe sort of talk about the origin. What were the first animal welfare laws that were introduced, and when was that?
Yeah, great question. So it's a big question. I mean, caring about animals has been, it's something that goes back into, ancient history, right, really, and spirituality.
I think I'm right in saying that the UK had the first animal welfare protection laws. I think that's correct. Let's see.
And religions have all had their version of compassion towards animals and frameworks around that. So it really does have ancient origins. And then, of course, philosophy took over the mantle. And, there were lots of debates throughout the centuries over, the treatment of animals by, various philosophers. So all of that really does kind of pave the way for what then followed in terms of codifying that into statutes. So actually the UK is the birthplace for the first kind of nationwide statute on animal law, and that happened around...
Called it. Anyone else know that? UK had the first animal welfare laws. That's something to be proud of. And we're currently in the process of upgrading those. If you haven't yet filled in the DEFRA consultation on banning cages for egg-laying hens, go and do that. I will find the link for that now.
Around 1822.
Hey, Oppenheimer, what's good? Good to see you.
It was something called Martin's Act. And it was actually the Ill Treatment of Cattle Act, I believe, but everyone refers to it as Martin's Act, named after an MP called Richard Martin. I believe he was maybe an Irish MP. But anyway, he cared about animals and did not like the way certain animals were being treated. So lobbied.
Right, this is the Google Doc that I prepared, the little cheat sheet. I put the link in chat just now. This has the link to the actual consultation, and then these are the questions that you're going to be asked. And these are some answers that you can literally just copy paste. So it's super easy. Anyone can do this. You don't have to be a farmer or working for an animal welfare org or anything like that. And, you know, there really aren't a ton of responses to these things. It looks quite long and difficult, right? There's over 50 questions in here. Most of them are not going to be relevant. You don't have to fill them in. And the ones that are, you can just copy paste. So go and hit that Google Doc up, find the link here to the actual consultation. It closes, I think, March 9th. So we've got time. Hopefully we get a lot of vegans responding to that.
For this piece of legislation, which essentially protected certain animals from ill treatment. And then what we see after that is a series of pieces of legislation where that act gets extended to include more animals, and then different acts where, you know, they'll deal with different industries. So where that was to do with cattle, but by the old meaning of the word, which is essentially chattel, meaning money and capital. You know, we see laws later that in the, you know, not long after the Cruelty to Animals Act, I believe.
I did, Poe. True. And it's still open and available for vegans and animal people to respond to. Really, anyone who cares and thinks that it's a good thing if we don't keep putting animals in cages, you can respond to it and let the government know. This is a real big opportunity. It's a massive change, potentially, for animals. As you know, a lot of the stuff that we do on the Fast Action Network is about cage-free campaigns. And here it's maybe going to get put into UK law, but it's not a sure thing, it's not guaranteed. So that's why they do these consultations, and you know that the egg industry is going to be very keen to tell the government all the reasons why we don't need to have these laws. Yeah, thank you, Poe. Feel free to copy-paste those answers because it's long if you have to think about the whole thing. But yeah, feel free to share that Google Doc as well.
Which regulated certain animal experiments. You then see throughout the decades, you see a series of laws that regulate, you know, the treatment of wild animals, how animals should be slaughtered, pet trades, boarding houses. So what you see is just a succession then of welfare protections come into place, bringing us to the modern day, where essentially everything operates now pretty much under the Animal Welfare Act when it comes to, you know, animals under human control or domesticated animals. But there are obviously different frameworks to do with animals kept in a wild state and you know, and trade and various things, invasive species. But the main piece of legislation when it comes to humans' control over animals is the Animal Welfare Act.
It seems like in the past sort of 200 years or so since that first piece of legislation, it feels like there's been, from a legal perspective, quite a bit of progress. I mean, there must have been some, you know, we're talking about bringing more animals into the scope, maybe sort of widening what that scope involves in terms of what happens to individual species. So presumably we have what would now currently be the best set of animal welfare laws that we've ever had on paper, but we also have the worst system that we've ever had, and we have more animals being exploited and farmed than we've ever had. I mean, in the UK, where we've never farmed more animals in a worse way than we currently do, but then also at the same time we have more laws supposedly protecting animals. And this seems like a bit of a paradox. Is that
true? And good point. Ed's very wise. He's very wise. He's very smart as well. You know, the whole intro bit that he does where he read out all of her bio and the different organizations that she worked for and so on. He does that off the dome. No notes. He's a very, very smart guy.
Is that because the laws are failing to be enforced correctly, or is it just that the industry is able to sort of bypass these laws? How is it true that we have these two seemingly contradictory realities in existence?
Yes, it's a really fair point. I think that at its core, it's to do with, you know, a wider problem and a global direction of travel in terms of the treatment of animals and in terms of, you know, the intensive farming model. I think that that's just a global trend. It's worth noting that in countries where they don't have as many animal protection laws as we might have, it's not that there's kind of public outcry about animal abuse there or you know, better treatment of animals there necessarily. So I don't necessarily think there's a correlation between the extent of animal laws that exist, and and the growing exploitation of animals. I do think that that's just a wider direction of travel. I do agree with what you've said, that actually there's a lot that should be happening within those laws that's not happening. I think that, it's one of the reasons why I think animal law is so important. I think what's happened historically is that these laws have been left to the industry to interpret them as they see fit. Just to give you one example of that, there was a law. Well, actually, the law was kind of based off a case. So there was a case called Ford versus Wiley in, I believe, the 1800s. And then the principle established in that case was essentially codified in a later law in 1911 called the Protection of Animals Act. In that case, a farmer removed horns off cattle without the proper anaesthetic, and it was known to cause a lot of pain. Anyway, that farmer was prosecuted, and within that case they essentially came up with the modern definition of unnecessary suffering. And that case basically said that, if you're going to, it was previously unlawful to do something cruel to an animal, and essentially it said it's cruel if it's unnecessary. But one of the things that was actually really crucial in that case is it essentially said that the commercial benefit of doing it without an anaesthetic was not a legitimate aim. It wasn't legitimate to do that. And I find that that's quite a progressive principle, especially when you look at where we are today. Now, essentially, that principle of unnecessary suffering was then codified in the Protection of Animals Act, and of course even exists today in the Animal Welfare Act 2006. But instead, instead of that principle of commercial benefits not being a legitimate aim being upheld, in fact, we see that commercial benefit is often the reason why there's a lot of suffering caused to animals. Now, I would argue that with lawyers, around throughout this kind of history and throughout this evolution of treatment of animals, nipping stuff in the bud, saying, hang on, what about this very important case and this very important principle? A lot of those practices might have been able to be curbed or stopped entirely. So, so to go back to your point, I think...
Damn, that's super interesting. So there was, from very early on, before this first law in 1911, cruel was defined as unnecessary, and that included a case where failing to use anaesthetic was deemed to be cruel and unnecessary despite some commercial benefit. A principle which does not seem to apply today. And she's saying that had there been lawyers to speak up for animals, who know there's 100 years of animal suffering that could have been massively reduced. Still, I think Edie is one of the only people who is a lawyer for animals today. I don't know how many exactly there are, but there are not that many of them. And it's a problem of resources. This is why it's so important to increase the funding going into the animal movement. We can have more people in these professional roles speaking up for animals. Imagine the course of history that could have been changed here had there been lawyers to point at and enforce these rules as they existed many years ago. So that's why it's so important for the movement to have resources so that we can have more lawyers to be enforcing the rules that we have on paper. Hey, Master Roach, good to see you. How are you doing?
What's happened is that these laws quite often have progressive aims kind of tied up within them, but left them to, left to the industry to do what they will. Or indeed no one monitoring, and so as a result they can get away even if actually we would argue it is unlawful. So,
and of course the industry does have lawyers and does have resources to pay people to argue against this, and even if they're completely wrong with respect to the laws on the books, if there's nobody on the side of animals to make the case and to push those laws to be enforced, then the industry can just do whatever they want. Yeah, we really, really need more resources in the animal movement. I mean, this is why I was so sympathetic to the whole farm kind thing, and I'm remain sympathetic to their broader mission, although their particular campaign in this case was obviously not very successful. They are absolutely barking up the right tree in terms of generating more resources for the animal movement. Imagine what we could do if we had 100 Edie Bowleses instead of only one. There could have been a ton of animal suffering prevented. Edie Bowles is obviously very, very clever as well. Yeah, you heard from Ed at the start about her background in various legal roles before founding the Animal Law Foundation. But yeah, there are people who wish that they could do this job, but there just isn't the money to have the number of lawyers for animals which really we need.
So yes, I think that there's a lot of opportunities that aren't being explored.
And I suppose part of the problem then is that when these practices were starting to become the norm within the industry, there wasn't a legal challenge. So perhaps the part of the issue that you face now, and obviously the animals face, is that these practices have become so ingrained, so normalized, so undisputed, that to challenge them legally, even if there seems to be, at least on paper, strong grounds to do so, feels like a more insurmountable task because of the sort of culturally, socially, and I suppose sort of not legally ingrained, but kind of allowed legally for so long that it doesn't feel like it's a legal issue to these farmers and industries.
Completely. That's exactly what I think has happened. And I think that, the good news is we can start now. And on top of that, can really help raise awareness of this stuff and hopefully press a bit of, press the reset button on some of these practices. I think that people would be horrified to learn, that some of these practices go on for, let's just take one example, the selective breeding of chickens, for example, and what that actually looks like for the life of a chicken and the suffering that's involved and the densely populated way that they're, the confined living spaces that they're forced to endure. I think people would be horrified to learn that. And the fact that it's legal. In fact, quite often when I tell people about my work, people are shocked that this stuff's legal. So actually, in people's minds, a lot of these practices are illegal. And so actually, there's a lot of work that can be done there to shine a light on it and hopefully press the reset button and put animals actually back into the Animal Welfare Act.
I mean, that sounds like a fantastic thing. Then there's this sort of voice that in the back of my head says, if there was a legal challenge that was indisputable, is there a risk that the government would just change the law, would retract the law rather than hold the industry accountable to the law?
Yeah, I'm smiling because they've just done that. I mean, actually, it's no smiling matter. No. But exactly. It is a risk. I mean, so background of the case where this has just happened. So one of the cases through the Animal Law Foundation that we're actually going through litigation with at the moment. Essentially, there was this EU-derived piece of legislation that said you can't pick animals up by the legs during transport and transport-related operations. Now, the only time a chicken will be picked up is during transport or transport-related operations, save for a few exceptions. They're dropped off in these massive sheds as chicks, and then 6 weeks later, scooped up, put into lorries, and that's the life of a chicken. What that actually looks like, that handling process, that transport process, it looks like these chicken catchers going into these big sheds, swooping up several, often in one hand, and then shoving them in crates. Now, this causes a lot of welfare issues, damp, broken legs, a lot of panic. Chickens can't breathe when they're upside down because they don't have a diaphragm. So there's a lot of welfare issues associated with this handling practice. And on top of that, this EU-derived law says you can't pick animals up by the legs. There is no carve-out for chickens within this legislation. And in fact, in the Netherlands, they've had success with this same piece of legislation because it is standard practice on farms throughout Europe. So anyway, we brought a similar case to what they brought in the Netherlands, in the UK. And sure enough, rather than enforce the law, the government has just recently changed the law. They rushed that through Parliament without any scrutiny. First dilution of animal welfare since Brexit, something that they promised that they wouldn't do.
Yes.
Labour's first animal welfare policy. So really, really shocking stuff. And of course...
Yeah, that was shitty. So there was this practice that was illegal. It was on the books as illegal. And when somebody spoke up for the animals and said, hang on a minute, this is illegal, you shouldn't be doing this, rather than actually enforcing it, they just changed the law. Said, oh, well, now it's legal. Yeah, that's not great. I guess that there's... Interesting that she said it was successful in the Netherlands. I guess that there's... there's some strategy as to which issues one goes after. And it's going to be a case of how feasible it would be to stop doing it to some extent. Like with the cages, it is feasible to get eggs without cages. And in fact, the majority of UK eggs now come from cage-free systems. So in that case, that's like feasible to change, feasible to enforce any existing laws. Whereas with something like handling, I mean, I guess that there are other ways of doing it. Of course, the idea is that a lot of this stuff, we shouldn't be doing it at all. So, like, yeah, of course, if you have a massive warehouse and you need to clear out tens of thousands of chickens and get them into this lorry, it is going to entail some rough treatment. Maybe we should stop having the massive warehouses full of tens of thousands of chickens, right? But damn, yeah, very disappointing that Labour just rushed through a change in the law, diluted the welfare standards, which they said they wouldn't do. Very disappointing. But good on Edie for forcing the issue.
Does exactly what you just said. To that, I would argue several things. I first of all would argue that it hasn't changed anything for chickens, on the ground. Chickens were being handled this way anyway. And in fact, if we're going to go with the kind of welfare benefit, actually prior to this dilution in law, it was standard practice to pick chickens up by one leg.
Right.
The law has made it clear that it has to be two legs. So actually on that very, very marginal welfare benefit, that's something. But of course, it's not about that. The thing that I also think it's done is it's basically informed the government that they are being watched and that they're being scrutinised. I think that they would be very cautious to do something like that again, certainly anytime soon. Throughout the process, the minimal scrutiny that did happen whilst it was rushed through Parliament, the House of Lords did produce a damning report scrutinising what the government has done and actually saying, why were you not enforcing this law before?
Right.
So again, that's something that has been put to the government by the House of Lords.
Damn, okay, that's pretty interesting. Edie's so well informed on all of the different relevant mechanisms and the things that can go on, right? Like, it's now on the record that the House of Lords have come and said, hey, how come you weren't enforcing this? And the thing about picking them up you have to pick them up by two legs, not by one. So they got like a small victory in that case. And it is now, it's been recently specified and confirmed, picking them up by one leg, definitely not allowed. So presumably that then gives you a door for investigators, animal welfare investigators on farms. You are going to see that happening. Of course, again, like you got blokes going in and scooping up chickens and chucking them on the lorry. You're going to get some of them being picked up by one leg. And now the government have recently said, hey, it definitely is illegal to do it by one leg. So that then becomes something where you can bring cases against particular farms, perhaps.
And I mean, I guess a kind of a more maybe important point is the fact that I don't think that we should be paralysed by that fear, by rocking the boat. The reality is the industry are going to want to do what they want to do. And they'll largely have a sympathetic ear with the government. I think we've got to basically do what we can to curtail so much of that, especially when we're dealing with these awful practices, these intensive models. And so, yeah, I think it's just part of a necessary approach to kind of do what we can.
Obviously we're passionately vegan, but people who aren't vegan are still passionate about animals and animal welfare issues. That might sound somewhat contradictory at times, but I think about previous examples where politicians or political parties have somewhat gone against the grain when it comes to animal issues. Theresa May with talking about repealing the fox hunting ban. And I think David Cameron as well, before then, was looking at changing the setup so that the chicken industry would be self-regulated, something, but then he had to do a U-turn on that because there was so much backlash. And so I think that obviously in this case, it's very damning, especially as it's been rushed through. But if they were going to go against the animal welfare bill, this sort of landmark piece of legislation that really sets the tone for how we as a country like to perceive our relationship with animals, I think that would be a step too far for the electorate, vegan or not, to say, oh, rather than, holding these industries accountable, we're going to scrap the law or heavily water it down. I think that would become a political issue in a way that maybe it hasn't previously been. So I do think we should find some comfort in sort of recognizing that Britain, even if we do contribute to these systems through the purchases we make, I think the British attitude is one that still values animals in a way that would make them uncomfortable to see these.
True. Let's look at the Brian research, acceptability of UK farming practices. This is research that we did, 3.5 years ago now. There's the percentage of people who find these various animal farming practices to be acceptable in blue, unacceptable in red, or don't know in yellow. And look, we've got big majorities finding all of these practices to be unacceptable. And this includes cages for chickens, keeping chickens in cages about as tight as an A4 paper sheet. This is handy for making the point that, yes, exactly as Ed's saying here, most people do find these practices to be unacceptable. And I guess the kind of thing that he's talking about in terms of it becoming a political issue and there being some political cost to pay for watering down animal welfare standards would come, in this case, in the form of Labour bleeding voters to the Greens, for example, or a party to the left who would be willing to enforce the laws properly. Do you feel some law changes are useless, like the ban on boiling lobsters alive? No, I don't think so. Well, I mean, yeah, there might be some. I'm sure we can think of some laws that would be kind of pointless. But I think the ban on boiling lobsters alive is a good thing. Whether people entirely stop doing it, yeah, is there any realistic checks? Yeah, that's a fair question. It takes people like Edie and investigators and, other animal people to insist that the laws are enforced. Because it's going to be... Obviously, the animals can't bring the case themselves, right? So that's why you have organisations like the Animal Law Foundation to bring the case on behalf of animals. But yeah, if now that is illegal, if they catch some company or some restaurants, whatever it may be, boiling lobsters alive, well, now there is a law on the books that you're breaking. So...
laws watered down significantly.
Completely.
Hopefully. But then I suppose that brings us on to something else, which is we were speaking before about how some of these laws are a little bit older and these practices are very much ingrained. But something that a little bit more recent happened is in relation to lobsters and crabs. So correct me if I'm wrong, but we have a sentience bill in the UK where we recognise certain species of animals as being sentient. And we recently added lobsters and crabs to that bill, which means that we should change how we treat them because we recognise that these are feeling, conscious, sentient beings under
maybe this might be what you're talking about, Poe.
the law. And then we have the Animal Welfare Act where we're not supposed to inflict unnecessary harm and pain and distress on animals. But what I think is quite scary is when that inclusion of lobsters and crabs occurred, which I think was just a few years ago, DEFRA in the UK, who is the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, had said that it wouldn't change how these animals were treated, including in restaurants, such as being boiled alive. So under law, we know these animals are sentient. We recognise them as being sentient.
That's exactly what you're saying, Poe. Yeah, you can kind of infer from that you ought not be boiling them alive, right? Here, you shouldn't cause unnecessary suffering to sentient animals. We've codified that. Lobsters are sentient animals. We've codified that. Boiling alive is unnecessary suffering. I feel like that is it goes without saying. So yeah, what's the argument that nothing will change? The DEFRA said that nothing will change.
Sentient. We also have laws that are supposed to protect them from unnecessary pain, harm, and distress, but we can still boil them alive in commercial kitchens. I mean, that's just such an obvious contradiction, surely.
So yes, you raise a really good point by bringing up the Sentience Act. And in fact, it's something that we're working on at the Animal Law Foundation, especially as it pertains to crabs and lobsters.
Right.
However, before I get into that, let's just take a step back in terms of what you've said about the recognition of sentience. So the Sentience Act 2022 essentially recognised animals as sentient and extended that to decapod crustaceans and cephalopods. Yeah. So it established that principle, right, which was, symbolically a very powerful position to have, that these animals are now recognised as sentient. However, prior to that, the recognition of sentience for lots of animals was already well established. As soon as you recognise that animals can suffer, which of course is present in lots of legislation, then you've recognised their sentience. What that means in terms of the contradictions that it reveals, right? You recognise animals as sentient and yet they receive certain treatment. I think that what that shows is something that does just represent the truth about the law, and especially the law in this country, which essentially means that a law can, do or don't do whatever it says it will or won't do. And so you can end up with these contradictions where you can recognise that animals are sentient and yet you can kind of legally have a piece of legislation that would mean that they suffer. I think that isn't the end of the story, because within that there's also a lot of opportunity. It essentially means that you can actually then lobby to have a law say something else and to say what you want it to say. I think sometimes people assume we need some massive lofty new way of being. Actually, we have a vehicle, we have a process in place where we could lobby for a law to say you cannot treat animals this way. And certainly there's been lots of laws that have said that. We've seen lots of laws ban practices, dolphinaria banned, frog grass banned, fur farming is banned. Various pieces of legislation have done that. So I think that the law is just that. It says what it does on the tin. And in this case, the law was simply set up to say animals are sentient. However, it did do something interesting as well as that. It did also set up the Animal Sentience Committee, And the Animal Sentience Committee is specifically set up to review government policy and policy making, and essentially put together a report assessing whether it feels that due regard is being paid to animals as a result of their sentience. And some of these reports are actually, quite critical of the government. In fact, recently they produced a report on the poor enforcement of animal welfare laws. And essentially, we've done a lot on that over at the Animal Law Foundation, and in fact cited our work. So it did set up that, which means that, the act itself wasn't entirely kind of futile and symbolic. It also did have a kind of a proactive element to it. However, more importantly than that,
it's very cool to have people who understand the inner workings of Parliament and the different levers that you can pull, the committees and the working groups and the everything else. The policy lead at Brian Research is a lady called Charlotte Flores. She has worked with Edie and goes to some of her events and stuff like this. And she's getting very, very good at all of that. She just finished her master's in animal welfare law. And she's getting very good at understanding all of the inner workings. The committees are an important mechanism for making these reports, and they can often be one of the major mechanisms that puts pressure on the government to act. And the MPs who sit on these committees really deserve our support and our applause. My MP is a vegan. My MP is Claire Hazelgrave, and she's a vegan. And actually, most of the Bristol MPs are vegans. I think there's 4 MPs in Bristol, and 3 of them are vegans. I think that's right. Kerry McCarthy is one, and Darren Jones is one. And Claire Hazelgrave, my MP. Well, that must be more than 4, actually. But yeah, pretty based.
that, the Sentience Act, in recognising decapod crustaceans as sentient, I would argue activated another legal protection where decapod crustaceans fall under, and essentially has banned the boiling of these animals alive. And this is what we're working on at the Animal Law Foundation currently. So under the welfare of animals at the time of killing regulations, decapod crustaceans are actually protected. It's very interesting. Prior to the recognition of sentience, it would have been difficult to argue that boiling these animals alive was illegal, because the protection under the welfare of animals at the time of killing essentially says that you can't cause these animals avoidable pain and suffering at the time of killing.
Right. It's so interesting how it all builds on each other. So she's saying that these laws on their own might not have the results that we want in terms of banning boiling lobsters alive. But in combination, there's these precedents set where it's important to have the law that said that crustaceans are sentient, and now it's important to have a different law that says that you can't cause the unnecessary suffering. And then it's important to have people like Edie who can proactively look at these things and understand how these different laws can be combined and make an argument for new ways of enforcing the law. We need 100 Edie Bowleses. We need teams of lawyers pushing this stuff, pushing for new laws and pushing for the enforcement and more favourable interpretation of existing laws. And there's so much that can be done. I mean, she's talking about now putting together the case that you can't boil lobsters alive. And how much pain and suffering can be prevented by successfully making that argument. Millions of lobsters a year that would have been boiled alive now won't be if this one lady is successful at making her argument. It's wild that it works this way. And by the way, it's worth saying as well, if you are, as Edie is, a qualified solicitor, and you decide to use that talent and qualifications to advocate for animals in a non-profit capacity, how much money is this person leaving on the table to fight the good fight? She could, if she wanted to, she could say, you know what, bollocks to the animals, I'm going to go and be a corporate lawyer and earn like 3 or 4 times as much, right? Or more, I don't know. The people doing this kind of work professionally for the animal movement, and often I'm sure being criminally underpaid at non-profits to do so, especially as the founder of the non-profit, I think, they deserve all the admiration.
So prior to the recognition of sentience, it would have been difficult to win that case, because essentially the other side would have just said, well, how do you know they suffer? Whereas as soon as they're recognised as sentient, then the suffering aspect of that test has been recognised. So then it all comes down to what's avoidable or not. And there are alternative ways of doing this. And so it is wholly avoidable. So over the Animal Law Foundation, we're exploring that. And in fact, we do hope to have some positive movement on that soon, which I mean, when I've been doing this for a long time now, so until something's happened, it's not happened. But we do hope to have some positive developments on that soon. But actually, one of the ways that we started that case was actually to do with that statement that you brought up at the start about DEFRA saying it won't change industry practices, that they're recognised as sentient, because in fact, we would challenge that statement, and we would say that that's an unlawful statement that DEFRA has put out, saying that, it doesn't change anything, because it does. It activates this other legal provision. And in fact, we've written to local authorities up and down the country, because local authorities are actually in charge of enforcing animal welfare law. And so we've written to them, making them aware of this, of what the Sentience Act does for this other legal provision, and had, varying degrees of success. So in Birmingham, a councillor put it to the chamber. In Sheffield, they actually opened a criminal investigation. It wasn't to do with boiling a lobster alive. It was actually to do with someone crushing a lobster with their heel. But it was a recognition that lobsters are protected under the welfare of animals at the time of killing. So certainly something to, build on. But yeah, like I say, hope to have some positive developments in that area.
That's good to hear, because it's one of those more obvious contradictions. And I think when we were talking, to me, one of the issues that sort of springs out about some of this is sort of the vagueness in the wording. And you'd said about avoidable, and you'd said, well, there are other ways of killing them, which means that it is avoidable. Does that mean, though, that, let's say in the case of chickens or pigs or cattle, where there are other ways of killing these animals, but most likely those ways are not going to cause less suffering or harm or less pain? And I think sort of the gas chambers example for poultry, but also for pigs, is a good example of something that is so utterly terrible, but the industry makes sort of welfare claims around it related to the way that they die and such. If there is, say, on paper, not another way of killing these animals that is higher welfare, that doesn't cause less suffering and pain, does the law inherently then protect something like gas chambers based on the fact that out of all slaughtering options, this would be the quote-unquote most humane and high welfare, even though the alternative would be to not do these things in the first place? Like, does that wording inherently protect the act of slaughter?
That's such a good question. Yeah, I believe there's proposals at the moment to ban gas chambers for slaughtering pigs, and some animal people that I know are a little bit torn on that, or a little bit nervous on it, because it's like, well, what's the alternative? And will that be better? Now, obviously, as Ed's saying, the ultimate alternative is we don't actually need to kill them at all. But yeah, if they phase out the gas chambers, yeah, who's to say that the next slaughter method is actually going to be better for the pigs?
So it's a really interesting point. So I think, yes, on the face of it, maybe. So on the face of it, there does tend to be, the assumption that unless it's expressly banned, it's not banned. However, there are some exceptions to that. So sometimes things have been banned just based on interpretations of the law. So foie gras, for example, was banned under the Animal Welfare Act because it wasn't deemed a suitable diet, and it was, deemed to cause unnecessary suffering. So I think that there's kind of opportunities to explore there in terms of how far some of these concepts can be interpreted. And I think that example you raised about the pigs going to gas chambers, again, I would put that down to there not being enough animal lawyers challenging this stuff, because actually...
Really awesome that Ed's fighting for animal welfare. He almost strikes me as more of an, I don't know, purist. Yes, yeah, I agree with that. Sometimes abolitionists, as I'm sure... frankly, I think the whole abolitionist versus welfarist divide is largely an artificial one, because most abolitionists are also going to be welfarists, and most welfarists are also going to be abolitionists. Certainly, it doesn't make sense to me to be opposed to or not supportive of welfare improvements, even if your ultimate goal is the vegan world and we shouldn't be slaughtering animals at all and so on. The thing that I always bring up, as you know, is that welfare improvements are good for the animals whose welfare is now improved, but they also introduce more costs to the system, therefore increase the price of the animal products, therefore reduce the number of animals farmed as well. But yeah, Ed's a very smart guy. I think he probably understands that pragmatic approach. And like, as you're seeing from what Edie's saying, it is all very incremental, and we're arguing for the next thing and the next thing. So, I mean, ultimately, incrementalism is all we have, right? We don't have the big green button vegan world now. So getting people to reduce their meat consumption, for example, getting welfare improvements in law, these are all good things. even if your ultimate goal is to go even further than that, you've got to be pragmatic. I mean, there's just the only option, right? There is no alternative to pragmatism and incrementalism. And we're making some real strides with it. So, we're going to stick at it.
And again, I don't want to kind of split hairs over kind of which gas is better.
Sure.
But actually, there are alternative ways, to killing these animals, and yet they're using one of the worst ways of killing these animals. For, again, doing full circle back to that Ford and Wiley case, for commercial reasons. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunities to explore there.
Right. So she's saying there actually are less painful ways of killing the animals, but it would just be a little bit more expensive to do it. Fuck me. I mean, the industries are fucking evil, aren't they? Let's be real. The industries are fucking evil.
That aren't being explored. And on top of that, there are interpretations which could potentially ban some practices.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Of course, yeah, the interpretation of it related to commercial reasoning, because the reason they use the CO2 and the ratios of gases they do is because it's the most commercially viable. So there is, every single day in slaughterhouses, there is a violation of the precedent that was set all those years ago. So it feels like that there is sort of a ripe opportunity for some good, strong legal testing of all of this. Is this something that the industry is aware of? Do you think that they're sort of cautious to this? Do you think they've just never had these challenges put towards them? Is there sort of a complacency in there? Do you think that they would be sort of prepared for something like that, or are they just sort of complacent in these attitudes?
Yeah, so I definitely think complacent in these attitudes, and I definitely think emboldened as a result of things going on for so long and with so much support. But I also think that it's also got more complicated. I think in part due to what you said earlier about these things have been going on for so long, they become the kind of cultural norm, and then it's very hard to undo that. The cat's out of the bag, or to want to use a more animal-friendly version if you know one.
Yeah.
But I also think the law itself has got more complicated. So under the current definition of unnecessary suffering within the Animal Welfare Act, when determining whether that suffering was necessary or not, one of the considerations is whether it's, whether someone's following legislation elsewhere. And so what we see is a whole kind of host of pieces of legislation that basically outline how to slaughter and how to keep these animals. And some of those conditions are like, horrific stocking densities or horrific killing methods. Yeah. But the problem is again, that's kind of set into the law as being something that
stocking densities, that is going to be I feel like that must be a big lever for increasing the cost of farming animals, right? The more densely you can stock animals, the more of them you're allowed to cram into a given amount of space. Obviously, the more money you can make from your size warehouse that it is, right? And if a law comes along and says, well, now there's an increase in the minimum stocking density, or I guess a decrease in the maximum stocking density it would be, you have to give each animal more space. Well, hell, if I'm a factory farm, I've got the same amount of space still. That means I have to have fewer animals. And that means that in order to cover my costs, I've got to charge more for each of them. And so there are fewer animals being killed. So that's a really good example of a welfare improvement, which would literally reduce the number of animals being farmed for a given amount of resources. And, you could, if you wanted to produce the same amount of animals, well, now you have to have another shed to do it, right? So it's going to increase the cost. So yeah, stocking densities, that is going to be... That's the main part of my answer for, people say, oh, define a factory farm. Paul Wood was doing this to me. Well, you can't define a factory farm. They don't want you to say stocking density because they know, actually, shit, if we change the laws around stocking densities, that actually will make it more expensive to farm the animals. And it's also obviously going to be something that makes the animals better off in the short term as well.
Then becomes deemed necessary suffering. I don't think that makes it impossible to challenge because, of course, the secondary piece of legislation, which these these pieces of legislation I'm referring to that tend to explain how to kill, how to keep an animal, tend to be secondary legislation. Secondary legislation needs to be compatible with the primary legislation, and the primary legislation in this case would be the Animal Welfare Act. And so these cases aren't insurmountable. They're just very complicated, made more complicated by the fact that these practices have been going on for so long.
Yeah, and that makes complete sense. One of the things that the industry will often say.
It really seems like something where the industry can get away with its interpretations of the law simply because we lack the resources to argue it. Right, so you don't need very many lawyers on their side to get away with it because we have so few on our side. I think it's pretty much just Edie in the UK arguing for farmed animals in the legal system. But yeah, if we had more lawyers, we're so right? We're so right with respect to the laws. The existing laws, if only we had more capacity to argue, at the very, very least, we would force more costs onto the industry because now they'd have to sort of getting more resources into the animal movement. Oh, damn, okay. I think my OBS just hiccuped. Am I back? Someone let me know in chat if I'm still here.
And I do actually have some sympathy for this. You know, in the case of, I'll say, pig producers in the UK, if we create stronger welfare laws that are then enforced correctly and ultimately change how the industry is forced to farm, there's
nice, thanks, Pay.
Also the issue with imports. And what's so frustrating is we've banned foie gras, we've banned fur, but it can still be imported, and it just sort of makes a mockery of the idea that we're saying these industries are so immoral that they should be outlawed, but you can still import them and sell them here. How do we then address the balance of creating laws and restrictions in this country? How do we then sort of combat the fact that retailers and supermarkets can just pay for cheaper imports that the consumer will opt for because of the lower costs, the way they're marketed and branded? Is there sort of that sort of challenge of not just restrictions in this country, but restrictions in terms of what we can import?
Absolutely.
Again, really good question. And again, something that Brown Research has done some good work on. This is something from Charlotte, who I mentioned before, who's our policy lead at Brown Research. More Brits agree on banning low welfare imports than agree that they like Christmas, dogs, or pizza. In UK surveys, 78% said that they like Christmas. 82% said that they're comfortable with dogs. 84% agree that they like pizza. And 89% agree that we should ban low welfare imports. We had higher agreements in 2025 versus 2023. And actually, this wasn't even the one that I was thinking of. Oh, this is the one I was thinking of. Everyone agrees it's time to end low welfare imports. So look at this. This is the general population. 84% somewhat agree or strongly agree for banning low welfare imports. If you ask arable farmers, 85%. And if you ask livestock farmers, 92%. So actually, animal farmers are the group who most strongly agree that we should ban low welfare imports of animal products. This is one of the rare issues where vegans and animal farmers are in full agreement. And it's not fair, right? Think about it. If you're a farmer in the UK, and we do have animal welfare laws by which you have to adhere, and that's making it more expensive for you to farm, and that, you know, we've agreed that this is the way we're going to do it because we think it's cruel to do the unnecessary stuff. But now you're having to compete with imported cheap animal products that don't have to abide by those same standards. Obviously, that's not fair. And look at this. This is all the political parties or the political affiliations, I guess. 87% of people who describe themselves as liberal agree. And even 84% of people who describe themselves as conservative agree. So, yeah, everyone agrees it's time to end low welfare imports.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, and that is a real risk. But again, it kind of comes down to what I was saying earlier about, about the law is what it is, and it says what it says, and it does what it does.
Right.
And, this is the principle, I think, of legal positivism. Yeah, we could essentially ban the import through legislation. So again, that stuff needs to be kind of lobbied for and campaigned for. But certainly certain things have been banned, seal fur, dog fur, cat fur, that's all banned. There's import bans on that stuff. So again, you could widen that principle. But it's a common concern actually that, we have these standards and yet it becomes a race to the bottom when you import. And in fact, especially as, trade deals are being entered into at the moment, that definitely seems to be front and center of, the animal protection community's mind, the fact that, we'll enter a trade deal with Australia and we'll end up seeing certain products in the market or America and, wasn't it chlorinated chicken
That's
that was
one.
the big, the
hormone beef and chlorinated
exactly,
chicken.
yeah. And it looks like, all of that stuff is potentially still on the table. And, currently we're going through negotiations with the EU, where we'll potentially be harmonising our legislation with theirs. And we just need to make sure that, that doesn't mean that we can't improve our standards. And indeed, we don't import things in that's to a lower standard. But of course, that's difficult to do, especially when dealing with global trade. But it's not, there are principles that have established that it's possible. And so I think it's really just within the realms of campaigning and lobbying to make that a reality. And the good news is the law can achieve it, which we've already seen.
Well, I suppose it is that sort of ongoing challenge, but then the same legal frameworks, which, as you're saying, we could use to restrict how animal products are produced in this country can be applied in similar ways. So there is that sort of way of closing that loophole, so to speak, which I think is sorely needed. And I think in a way, I think it would make the argument more compelling for animal farmers in this country if they felt that they weren't going to be sort of left hung out to dry by having extra restrictions placed on them, but then undercut by imports. So in a way, there's a sort of argument that if the government was able to sort of close the gaps on imports to make them match the sort of the standards we have here, that would actually maybe encourage farmers here to naturally want to improve standards, or at least make them less antagonistic towards the idea of doing so. But then maybe that's wishful thinking. I'm not so sure.
I don't think it's wishful thinking, actually. You do tend to see a lot of alignment on this particular issue between the animal protection community and, and farmers, because farmers do not want to be importing, they do not want the UK to be importing in products that undercut them. There might be a commercial reason to it, but there's a lot of, and they would argue that they also, want to see those standards mean something. But yes, there is alignment on that particular issue.
I guess part of the problem then is if we move the conversation on to sort of the next element of this, which I think is quite fascinating and arguably in many ways maybe even more challenging. So let's say that we have laws passed that are obviously there to protect animals, and let's say that we pass stronger laws. These laws are kind of more ingrained and as a consequence are providing more meaningful protections. There's still the issue of enforcement. Because we see from investigations in farms and in slaughterhouses, we see consistently violations of laws. And that's just from the ones that are investigated. But, there are thousands and thousands of farms. How do we know that these laws are actually being properly enforced? It's one thing having something on a piece of paper or online that says this is how animals should be treated. But then we still see terrible things happening on a daily basis that breach even these legal standards. I know that with Animal Law Foundation, you've published a couple of reports looking specifically at this very issue. So I'm wondering if you could maybe speak to it and some of the problems you faced and maybe some of the solutions to make this issue a little bit more manageable.
Yeah, sure. And you said, how do we know that the laws are being enforced? And to answer that question, well, we know that they're not actually. You know, we know that. So, yeah, our data that we've gathered at the Animal Law Foundation essentially asked all of the regulators and enforcement bodies that are responsible in this space a series of questions.
I feel like I wouldn't be surprised to see the Animal Law Foundation become an ACE recommendation in the future, because it's just such high leverage. Again, I think it's only Edie. I might be wrong about that. There might be a couple of paralegals or another lawyer on the team, maybe. It's not a big team. And they could get victories that help millions and millions of animals simply by making sure that existing laws are enforced and arguing for new laws and reinterpretations of existing laws. Is very high leverage what the Animal Law Foundation is doing.
So that includes the 168 local authorities that enforce animal welfare law throughout the UK. It includes DEFRA, it includes the Scottish Government, the Welsh Government, the DERA, the Northern Irish Government, and also the Food Standard Agency, Food Standard Scotland, and essentially asked a series of questions, enforcement-related questions, to really get a picture of what's going on.
Right.
And, you know, some key findings from that data shows that 2.5% of farms are being inspected. Of those farms that are being inspected, 1 in 4 show non-compliance. Of those that show non-compliance, only 1% are being prosecuted. It shows that there's a...
Damn, that's wild. So we only inspect 2.5%, and we find that of those, actually a quarter of them are breaking the law. And then of those that are definitely breaking the law, only 1% are prosecuted. Yeah, I hope she gets on to why that is. If it's just a resource problem, like if there were more lawyers like Edie able to do this work, we could prosecute more of them and investigate more of them and bring cases against more of them. Yeah, I think the case for supporting this kind of work is very strong.
About 1 inspector for 900 farms. So it shows that these departments are completely, under-resourced to do this activity. So really it does paint a very damning picture of the enforcement of animal welfare laws, and absolutely something that needs to be tackled. You know, we've spoken at length about interpretation and what that can unlock and the opportunities that can unlock. Enforcement, I think, can also unlock a lot of opportunities. I mean, firstly, it just ensures that the law means something in practice, right? And it also ensures that the public, who, like you said, the British public do tend to care about animals, it ensures that what they think is happening is actually happening. And I would say so far that is not the case. It's currently not the case. So it ensures that there's some reality there, some alignment there. I think what it does, which is kind of harder to almost, quantify, but definitely intuitively feels like something real, is this idea that animals matter under the law.
Right.
That they're individuals, that they're worthy of these legal protections that are given to them. And I think that's a really important part of this story. The fact that they are, members of society that have been given these legal protections, and that for each animal that needs to mean something. I think that's crucial. And so that's, again, one of the key reasons why we want to make sure that animal law is enforced.
I mean, it's such a vital part of the conversation because it's also that idea that if there is sort of a general viewpoint, which is if you sort of do something wrong, or if you're not quite up to standards or up to scratch, there's not really any consequence there. Maybe you'll get reprimanded. Maybe if you've done something particularly extreme, or it creates quite a media storm, maybe there'll be a prosecution. But realistically, even if you get found out of doing something that breaches those standards, there's not really going to be much consequence. But the flip side to that is if you can start to enforce these laws, hopefully it will increase compliance, because they'll start to realize that if they do get caught out, there is sort of a chain of reactions there. One thing that I think is also pretty interesting in terms of this conversation around enforcement is it's not just on-farm enforcement necessarily. It's also the way that the issue animal farming, or the non-issue in terms of how the industry presents itself, is sort of reinforced in the minds of the consumer. We're talking about how if we have laws in place that protect animals, that is obviously a fantastic thing. And if those laws are enforced, that's even better. But also the issue that we have is And actually you spoke about this towards the beginning, because you said when you speak to people, people are shocked that these things are illegal. And I suppose that doesn't just speak necessarily to a failing of the legal system. It speaks to how covert the industries are in terms of how they operate. They are sort of preaching a certain set of values in terms of how they treat animals, but sort of in these facilities, what's happening is a completely different story. So much so that the people who are buying these products are not even necessarily aware, which is why they're shocked when they find out they're legal. So there's also the issue of how these products are marketed, how the consumer views these products. They're not thinking, oh, this pig was tail docked to our meeting. This pig was killed in a gas chamber. These things were happening to these animals. That's not the viewpoint they're necessarily taking into that moment of consumption, because the way that these products have been marketed is sort of tricking the consumer into having this illusion of animal farming, which is not the reality of animal farming. Is that something that you've come across? I believe you've done a report looking specifically at the issue of marketing and sort of misinformation across the system of animal product production. Could you maybe speak a little bit about that? What you found? What are some of the main issues? How do we challenge that? What can we do? Is this just, again, a legal issue, or is there something a little bit more around public awareness that can be brought in without necessary legal changes?
I'm smiling because this is a project that we might actually work with Edie on the consumer misinformation stuff. That conversation's in the works, and Charlotte's schmoozing Edie on this matter. As mine was, I expect this podcast was recorded some time ago. Well, they have mentioned a couple of things which are fairly contemporary. So maybe not. But yeah, let's see. This is this might be a job I end up doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this project of work, this program of work that we're doing on misinformation is actually something a bit different. Usually we do focus on the animal laws themselves, and so focusing on misinformation is a bit different, but we decided to do it just because it does feel like a key part of the puzzle. Partly because people do not know the reality, and they assume that these laws have passed and that's the end of the story. So it's all so interconnected. The work that we're doing on misinformation is actually broader than just products. It's actually just misinformation on however the story of animal farming is told, right? So we actually looked at TV programs, we looked at journalism, just essentially trying to kind of paint this picture, and also kind of doing it maybe with no judgment, and just to give you a kind of an anecdote, quite often when we are conducting a case, we'll get some media coverage around that. And quite often, these journalists will be sympathetic and they'll cover it really well, but they'll use a picture of, a healthy looking animal. So there's no ill intent there. But what it does do is it reinforces, it could be talking about a really awful practice and then have this healthy image. And so again, it just kind of reinforces this idea of the lives that these animals live that doesn't reflect reality. So our report just wanted to kind of really map out what the situation is. So in terms of advertising, we looked at, I think...
Yeah, what a pisser that is if you do like a long interview with a journalist talking about all of the terrible factory farming practices and so on, and then they write a nice story about it, and probably their editor, rather than them, choose a picture of a happy cow in the field. And you're thinking, that's so not what I said. That's so not the message here. This is the picture that speaks 1,000 words, and they're all the opposite of what I said.
Around 47 producers, 3 of those didn't show any kind of animal imagery on their website. And those that did, over 80% showed animals outside, healthy animals outside. Similarly, we looked at 9 supermarkets, and 100% of those on their corporate website showed healthy animals outside. Of, the media stories that we looked at, significant numbers again showed animals outside, and similarly with TV programs, healthy animals outside. So there's a common kind of story being told to the public, to the consumer. Now, what's interesting is that most of these areas will actually be regulated either by, law or soft law. They might have their own internal codes, to follow. And quite a lot of these, in fact, I'd argue all of these, will have some sort of principle around not misleading and being honest. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we would argue that a lot of these practices are not doing that, and they're certainly not showing the alternative. And in fact, that's another thing I think that the report revealed. It revealed that, yes, there's a dominant image in people's minds of animal farming.
I guess she's talking about another report, not the one that we're involved in, or maybe involved in.
Which does tend to be animals outside, healthy animals outside. But I actually think maybe a bigger part of the problem, or at least an equal part of the problem, is that there's nothing challenging that dominant image. And that creates just a complete distortion of reality in people's minds. And we know that can cause problems. So, for example, we would argue that causes issues with persuasion. So, that some data from the Food Standard Agency showed that 74% of people care about animal welfare when making, when buying animal products. There's also data to show that when there's kind of exaggerated claims, or when claims are shown to be exaggerated, this is on greenwashing specifically, this data, but when there's exaggerated claims on greenwashing, once people realise that they're exaggerated claims, that actually puts them off claims in general, environmental claims in general. And so there's a real risk that actually what it would do is it would just mean that those that are doing kind of higher welfare practices, actually people won't bother buying those products because they would have lost trust altogether. So it's just kind of this is creating a distorted reality, and it has real life consequences on people's perception, people's actions.
I'm thinking
that's interesting. So is that saying there's a risk to establishing that the imagery is in fact misleading? I guess the idea is that if you can establish that it's misleading, you can pursue legal mechanisms to prevent it from being able to be used. But yeah, there's a risk that once you lift the lid on that, I guess rather than boycotting animal products, people will go, oh, well, I won't bother with the high welfare stuff then. Even in cases where that is actually going to be a good thing for animals. And they'll just buy the factory farm stuff because they assume it's all bullshit. That's an interesting risk to be aware of.
Thinking about how sort of the word sustainable and eco-friendly has become so diluted and meaningless in terms of every company says they're sustainable. Every product has some sort of environmental claim, and it devalues it to such an extent where you just look at them on any piece of packaging, on anything, you just think it's greenwashing. You think there's a problem, that you think it sort of reduces, or it creates apathy, I suppose, in the consumer, where they just feel like they're being sold this lie. And I suppose the risk with what you're saying then is that the same could happen with animals, where people might claim that they care about animal welfare, or they might genuinely do, but then they become...
This is why it's so important to have compulsory animal welfare labels. If I can plug another little insight on the Brian Research website. Let's control F for welfare labels. Why isn't it coming up the thing that I'm looking for? Labels, maybe? Here we go. Yeah, well, hey, this is interesting. First of all, there's a higher proportion of people who support compulsory animal welfare labels than who support compulsory environmental impact labels, and even higher than support compulsory health and nutrition labels, which of course we do have. We have the front of packaging traffic light system where you get a red if it's too high in salt and all the rest of it. And we, of course, you have to disclose all of the nutritional information on the back of packaging as well. So this is something that already exists, and accordingly we have overwhelming support for it. There's 90% support. But actually we've got 91% support for compulsory animal welfare labels. And it's so important that it should be compulsory, because if it's not compulsory, as we argue here, with private certification schemes, which is what we have at the moment with things like Red Tractor, RSPCA Assured, Soil Association Organic, if it's not compulsory, and you can tell us about the animal welfare score if you want to, but you don't have to, well, guess what? It's only going to be the high welfare products that tell you. The low welfare products aren't going to tell you. Right? Imagine if we made it optional to have the health traffic lights. And now all of the cake producers are going to say, damn, our cake has got all these red traffic lights on the front of the packet and it's telling consumers that it's unhealthy. Well, if it's optional to put those there, we just won't tell them. And then we're going to have a selection effect where only the healthy cakes, the fruit loaves or whatever, are going to be the one to put their nice green traffic lights and say, look at this is actually low in free sugars or whatever. They're going to be the only ones to disclose it. And as a result of that, when you walk down the cake aisle, you see nothing but green traffic lights and no red traffic lights because nobody's decided to disclose that information. You're going to come out of that aisle and think, cake is pretty healthy. And so it's exactly the same thing with these optional animal welfare labels. Never mind, it's not even to mention all of the stuff about these unprotected bullshit terms like from trusted farms, right? Reared by our trusted farmers. This is almost certainly from a factory farm, and so is this. Is there any sort of assurances about the welfare of these animals at all? Nope, but we trust them. Brilliant. What's that worth? So we've got these unprotected terms which producers can sort of imply that there's some sort of welfare standards going on. These are from trusted farms. These are from trusted farmers. That's very reassuring to the consumer, but actually doesn't mean anything at all. So, again, there's proposals to have compulsory welfare labels, which, if that's enforced and honest, we're going to have 90% of animal products saying this comes from a factory farm. Right? If these labels are optional, then they're completely meaningless. Because you're only going to hear about it if it's good news. You're not going to hear about it if it's from a factory farm. And it's going to skew the overall perception of the category. I'm pulling out all the Bryant Research articles today.
I'm so tired of having these companies consistently telling them or overstating their animal welfare practices that they just opt for anything.
You can see, it's kind of relatable. It's a breakdown of trust, really, is what, it kind of resonates as to how that could happen. So there's absolutely an issue in the system. Where we find it particularly interesting and relevant to our work is that a lot of this stuff may also be illegal. So there's consumer protection laws that essentially prohibit certain practices that make, people enter purchasing decisions that they wouldn't have had it not been for the misleading activity or indeed the omission or the aggressive practice.
Seems obvious, but £300 rob never gave it a thought. It probably never come across their mind. Yeah.
There are actually consumer protection rules that should protect the consumer.
Are you talking about a specific person, Bo? Well, that's a hypothetical, Rob.
From this, and that's what we're really interested in. We're interested in
Hey, it's my buddy, hypothetical Rob.
Exploring those opportunities. Now, of course, these cases are never straightforward. They require a lot of evidence. You need to find that consumer that you would argue has been.
This is interesting. So in some cases, it's more feasible, right? There's some horrific abuse of animals going on, but it's more feasible in some cases to argue that that's bad not because of the animal being horrifically abused per se, but because a consumer was misled about that. It's a bit of a sad reflection on, our priorities, I guess, as a society. But again, very cool that Edie is being very proactive and thinking about the ways that you might argue for these things. Even if you can't go route one, there's other options, right? So consumers being misled, well, this becomes a whole illegal issue of its own. And of course, consumers largely are misled with respect to factory farming and the conditions on farms. Like these fucking "from trusted farms" labels. I mean, this drives me nuts. This means absolutely nothing, but of course it's just enough for consumers to go, oh, it's all right, it's from trusted farms, probably some sort of welfare assurance.
Been misled and wouldn't have purchased had they not been. So it's not, it's not an easy case to build. But certainly, when you look at what the law says and then you look at some of these practices, certainly something doesn't seem to kind of add up there.
Yeah, it's like the same law that you would use to sue a pizza company who delivers in 40 minutes when they're guaranteed it in half an hour. It's just like, as a consumer, I was misled. That's the level.
So there's definitely, again, opportunities to explore. There's also, the law protects people from fraud. Fraud is about misrepresenting and trying to get a gain as a result of that misrepresentation. In fact, there's been cases where there's been actually 2 really important cases in Dorset. There must just be a very good local authority that are onto this stuff. But they're kind of very similar cases as well.
Yeah, that's another interesting part of this, by the way. This is enforced by local authorities. So there's not like a central government body responsible for enforcing these animal welfare laws or these consumer protection laws. It just comes down to the local council where you live. Like Bristol City Council would be for me, or maybe I guess I'm in South Gloucestershire technically, South Gloucestershire Council, which they're going to be underfunded. They're not going to be full of inspectors and like people who know about this stuff and have the resources to enforce it. So the responsibility for enforcement falls on local authorities who just don't have the resources to do it. But some of them do, and it's good to know that there are some areas, Dorset she's mentioned, have had a couple of cases where they have followed through on it. And actually that's probably something really valuable to know for the animal movement as well, right? Here's a local authority who actually is quite good on this, and we can enforce here, and it can help to set a precedent and so on.
So one of the cases involved a couple who were selling eggs whilst chickens were kind of roaming around near where they were selling the eggs. Of course, the impression that the consumer has buying those eggs is that the eggs come from those chickens, when in fact they'd actually been buying cheap eggs and just putting them in these boxes by their roaming chickens.
Wow.
And Dorset...
That's fucking shocking, isn't it? Oh... Yeah, that's, I think I've heard Ed even talking about a case like this with respect to backyard eggs, which is one of the sort of edge cases where you could make a case that, if you really have backyard chickens in ideal welfare conditions and they're laying eggs anyway, then if you eat the eggs, is there really any harm done there? But it's like the start of a slippery slope, because you can say, well, okay, what does it matter then if I am the person with the happy chickens in my backyard, or if it's my neighbour's backyard, and I can go and buy the eggs off of them? But then you get these situations where people are just misleading, getting factory farmed eggs from the Tesco's down the road, and then putting them out in front of their house, and people assume that this is where they're from. That's shocking.
Council took them to court over some consumer protection legislation. They did that with another case that was very, very similar and under fraud, or the person kind of pleaded guilty to fraud.
Right.
And so there are actually some, important decisions that have happened in this space, and definitely scope to explore further.
So if, for example, a company, let's say an egg company again, was making claims about their hens being outdoor on grass, they had imagery on their website, that kind of thing, but they were actually being housed indoors, that would be a claim potentially for fraud or for sort of violation of consumer protection.
Yeah, hell yeah. If that's able to be done on the small family farm where they've got the chickens there and then they're selling the factory farmed eggs with the impression that they're from those happy chickens, the same must apply to, as you mentioned, like the 100% of supermarket websites have the pictures of happy chickens, even though the eggs are coming from factory farms.
Protection.
Yeah,
laws.
absolutely. You'd have to, you'd have to go through what you're actually seeing and what the reality is then against what the legal protection is. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that has become apparent is I think that producers have become more alive to that issue, in fact. And quite often what you see on product packaging now is, is not actually animals outside. You see, the web, we were talking about kind of websites and, well, actually sometimes product packaging, but actually I think that there has been a move towards removing that imagery for probably fear of this type of case. And instead what you tend to see are things that conjure up those images in people's minds. So a splash of green, or a farmhouse. So it does a similar thing.
That's so interesting. Or from trusted farms, right? We said we trust them. We never said that they weren't factory farms.
But without doing the potentially misleading thing.
Okay, so I guess this is the problem, isn't it? There's like an updating of how.
It's interesting how little the consumer needs to make that assumption as well, right? If we want to believe something, we ask, can I believe this? And if we don't want to believe something, we ask, do I have to believe this? So if we want to believe that, these eggs are coming from happy chickens who are reared outdoors and everything else, then we only need a splash of green to make it so. And we don't want to believe that they're coming from factory farms, so unless it's made very, very explicit and put in front of our noses in a way that we can't ignore or deny, we're going to plead ignorance to the factory farming part. There's very predictable consumer psychology in a way.
How these companies or these industries will market themselves, appeal to the consumer. They'll change that. It reminds me, actually, when you were talking about that just then, it reminds me of supermarkets who have created like fake farm names. I think Tesco have done it. I think a couple of them have done it, where they put this made up farm on the packaging to create the idea, this wholesome farm, it's traceable, farm to fork, but the farms don't exist. They're just it's just marketing. It's just a name. So there are all these little sort of sneaky things that the industry can do and what supermarkets do as well to sell as products. And it becomes quite challenging for consumers to know.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here, such that if we had more, it's really looking into my soul right now. It's a good pause. It seems like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, such that if we had more lawyers in the animal movement who could argue these things and enforce these things, there's so much which is obviously misleading that 100 Edie Bowleses could fucking get them on. But our resources for chasing after this stuff and enforcing it is so thin on the ground. I mean, Edie's mentioned here like at least 3 or 4 different cases and work streams and projects that they have going on. And again, I think it's just her and maybe a couple of other people, but it's not enough. And there's so much unexplored. This is why we need more resources in the movement. This is why Vegan 2.0 is so important. Imagine if all of the people who are making the effort of going vegan were making, let's face it, probably for most people, less effort to fund effective initiatives that can start to enforce these laws and improve welfare and reduce meat consumption at an institutional level and improve alternative proteins. Like, what's the latest UK data on diets? 3.1% vegan, plus 5.5% vegetarian, plus 5.4% pescatarian. 3.1% vegan. That is not nothing. That is not nothing. So 3% of the UK population are going to the effort of following a vegan diet. The UK population is about 7 million. 70 million. So 1%, that'd be 700,000. So it's about over 2 million vegans in the UK. If all of them were giving the £15 a month suggested by FarmKind, that'd be £180 a year. 2 million times £180 a year. £360 million. And the current budget of the whole animal movement, farmed animal movement, is $300 million as well. So that's even less in pounds, right? So this would, if all of the UK vegans were to donate £15 a month, we would more than double the whole animal movement's resources. And that's a modest ask. £15 a month, that is not much money. Okay, imagine if we could double the movement's resources and have way more lawyers fighting to enforce this stuff. It would be game-changing. That's why Vegan 2.0 is so damn important. Hey, I've got my Vegan 2.0 mug here, by the way. I've got my Vegan 2.0 cap up there as well. That's why it's so important to spread this idea. When you Google Vegan 2.0, you find me talking about the importance of giving to effective animal charities and sharing pro-animal things on social media and taking part in organised campaigns like we were doing a moment ago on the Humane League's Fast Action Network. If all of the vegans in the UK only were to become Vegan 2.0s, we would double the movement's resources, and that's just the start of it. We'd be growing the number of vegans as well, which would lead to even further increases in the movement's resources. The power of normalizing Vegan 2.0 and advertising Vegan 2.0, it's absolutely huge. I'm going to keep on pressing it, but my channel's still small. There's 3 of you here right now. Like the stream, by the way. But there's too few of us. We need these ideas to catch on to the extent that the UK's 2 million vegans put their hand in their pocket for £15 a month and fucking more than double the animal movement's resources. Okay, it's a little extra effort and it would completely change the game for animals.
What's real to know, what's true to know, what logos mean and what certifications mean and what they actually translate to in terms of what's happening to animals. And there's this constant challenge, and I think it's also broader than just what we're talking about today, where the emphasis is consistently put on the consumer to make better choices. Yeah. And as a vegan who advocates for lifestyle change, I'm asking...
Also buy merch. All the money from the merch is going to effective animal charities. I've only sold 2 things so far, and they were both to myself. So get on the Vegan 2.0 merch. That means that there's, we're very early in the Vegan 2.0 revolution, and you can be one of the vanguards of the Vegan 2.0 revolution. And all you need to do is buy a cap, or a t-shirt, or a tote bag, or a phone case.
Asking people to do the same. And it's this consistent idea that I think...
I hope that illustrates how much this would change the game, by the way. I mean, I don't want to overcook it, but like we can... That's the only way we're going to change the game for animals. Vegan 2.0 is the only way.
The burden of responsibility rests on consumers.
Yeah.
But what your work does, and what people who are sort of challenging the legal system does, is it says actually the burden of responsibility is not on the everyday person who's in a supermarket trying to make the best choice and doesn't understand what these different things mean. It's on these industries who are consistently manipulating, twisting the truth, obfuscating, that they have this sort of playbook that they are utilizing all the time to mislead people into purchasing products that if they knew the reality of, they might feel differently about purchasing. And I think that is one of the most important things about legal change, is it's changing that burden of responsibility and saying this is on our lawmakers, on the enforcers of those laws, and on the industries themselves, not on the people every day who are just trying to get by and make the best choices they can.
Sure.
But with that, there becomes the problem of these industries are so powerful. Governments work hand in hand with these industries. There's often a sort of circular revolving door of the private and public sector. How do we, in effect, go up against these behemoths, these huge industries that have so much power, so much influence, and are able to manipulate in the ways that they do? Is there the capability for us to meaningfully launch something that will fundamentally alter the system in a way that will protect animals meaningfully?
Great question. And I don't think you kind of overstate the challenge. You know, I think that's true. Everything you said is true. It's a huge undertaking. It's a huge challenge. And this stuff is so embedded and it's gone on for so long, and it's absolutely difficult. But I am incredibly optimistic in terms of, well, first of all, I look around and I see such talent working in this space and people that are just trying out incredible new ideas all the time that are really, you know, becoming thorns in the side of, you know, of the industry and forcing the industry to, you know, change their approach. And that's incredible, you know, that these kind of small organizations can do that.
She's good, isn't she? She's a very good speaker, very smart.
And I think with everything like this, you know, this has been true of anything that's shifted over time. You know, it's always been up against this, and eventually things change. And so I definitely see it as the direction of travel, but I certainly see it as being an incredibly challenging task. And I do think that the law plays an important role in that. You know, what's interesting about the law is it compels people to act. You know, when I take DEFRA to court, they have to reply. They have to put together a case. They have to argue their case, you know, against a small little charity. You know, in the eyes of that court, we are equal and we've got a case. You know, certainly when we get past a certain threshold, you know, we have to get past the permission stage, but then it's us versus them. That's incredible. That's the government. And similarly, you know, if you had a case against a massive corporation, it would be a similar situation. Okay, there are other things to overcome. They'll have top lawyers, they'll have a lot of money to throw at it. But the fact that you can compel them to be there to defend themselves, that's huge. So I think that there are loads of things that can be done to stop them. And I think that the good news is I do think that the public is on our side. It's just so much of this stuff is kept in the dark, but the public is on our side. Not only that, justice is on our side. And, you know, with you know, armed with that, I think it is just a matter of time.
I think you touched on something which is really important. I think the general sort of attitude in the public is people like a good David versus Goliath story. And I think when we talk about sort of Goliaths, we're thinking of these huge corporate businesses, you know, whether it's the big meat companies, the big fossil fuel companies, whoever it is. And there is, I think, this desire to see these companies held accountable. Even people who aren't vegan, I think, have a general dislike of sort of the big meat, so to speak, and the practices they employ, the exploitation of animals, humans, the degradation of the environment that goes along with it. And so I think people do have this sort of perception that in a court situation, if these laws were being meaningfully challenged, or the interpretation of them was being challenged in a way that positively reflected on animal welfare and on our treatment of animals, I think that the general, pardon the pun, appetite of society would be one that is in favour of these companies being held accountable. So they might have political power, they might have financial power, but I think there is sort of the public power, that desire for something meaningful to happen, because I think we have that now. We have, whether we're left, right, I think there is this sort of anti-establishment thinking that means that we're kind of growing sick in a way of these huge, big industries that don't care about us consistently determining the direction of travel. And I think a lot of the political zeitgeist right now and the turbulence in that is people trying to find out where they're aligning themselves in this sort of battle against the status quo. And the status quo has for so many years been these huge, big corporate industries determining what we buy, how we live, how we're influenced by advertising. And I think the way that we perceive our legal system around animals is ripe for that kind of challenge. And I think people would respond positively to that.
I couldn't agree more. And to be honest, I think that, and I think that what I've seen in this, you know, in doing this work has actually been that the public are also kind of victims of the same stuff. You know, they think laws are being passed, but those laws are not being interpreted or enforced how they, you know, how the public believe that they should be, or, you know, how they would imagine that they would be. Similarly with...
how frustrating is it going to be if you are one of the Edie Bowles, one of the understanders of this stuff, and you're speaking to people who are like, oh, well, didn't we already make that illegal? Like, no, not quite. Yes, kind of, but no, it's not enforced, or that law doesn't mean what we thought it meant. Like, it's very, the public are victims of the misinformation and the non-enforcement of laws and the ill interpretation of the laws. Yeah.
Consumer protection laws, the public are being actively misled. I think that there's so much that actually unites people around this issue that I think should be explored more.
Certainly. And just then I was thinking about how, the public is consistently misled. We're told about CCTV and slaughterhouses, but then we're not told about what that actually means. How's this CCTV going to be monitored? Who's monitoring it? The slaughterhouses themselves are monitoring. There's so many things that we're told are happening, that we're told are meaningful, and yet we're consistently let down by the lack of enforcement, by the lack of the actual laws themselves. So I do think it sort of wears people down, and the question becomes: does that wearing down of people create sort of apathy, or a strong commitment to something meaningful? And I think it's something meaningful. I think people want something to happen. They want laws to mean something. They want animals to be treated well, and broader than that, of course, the way that we're sort of treated by these industries, we want to be treated well and fairly and equitably by these industries. So I do think that there is something to be said about that, and I think the zeitgeist right now is one that is sort of hungry for that to occur. But in the meantime, I'm thinking about an investigation that was released by Joey Carbstrong. He does these investigations really powerful. He did one recently, which was looking at a slaughterhouse, and what I think was quite notable was there was CCTV in this slaughterhouse, and also there was an FSA inspector present at the time. Is part of enforcement not just having sort of agencies with the...
How fast are we progressing in comparison to past moral issues? Very good question, Poe. A very good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure exactly how you would measure it, but I have seen some studies or analyses which ask that kind of question. Like, I remember seeing something about what were the successful and unsuccessful strategies used in the abolitionist fight against slavery, for example. The suffragettes, I'm sure you could have a similar analysis if there is not one already. I've seen smoking is a good one. Like, cigarette smoking is actually something that we very successfully addressed. Here we have something that's hugely addictive and like very difficult to get people to change their behaviour, one would think. But if you look at the rate of cigarette smoking over time, it's like down, 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 down. Cigarette smoking over time graph. Oh, here we go. Our world and data. So this seems like something that would be well worth looking at. Like, how did we manage to do it so well there? Okay, so this is share of deaths attributed to smoking, 1990 to 2021. High-income countries, it used to be 16% of deaths were attributable to smoking. And in 30 years, it's gone all the way down to 9%. What percentage of the population who smoke? Oh, wow, look at that. Death rate from smoking. Estimated annual number of deaths attributable to smoking per 100,000 people. It's gone down in all, across all income groups. Death rate from smoking by age. Okay. Number of smokers is what I want to see. Prevalence of smoking across the world. Here we go. Share of smokers among the population. All right, you ready? Woof, look at that. Is that India? Based India. Indonesia has gone up. That's worrying. But look at that. India used to be 56% of people smoke. And now it's 24%. It used to be a majority. And now it's not even a quarter. And that's immense, isn't it? There's the US. Oh, that's actually a bit more modest. Only goes back to 2000 though. It'd be interesting to see this going further back. Share of people who smoke every day in the world used to be 25% in 1980. Now it's 19%. Okay, that's a decent decline. I thought it was more dramatic than that, I have to say. Smoking by gender. How has the prevalence of smoking changed over time? This is what we want. Sales of cigarettes per adult per day. And this does go further back. Oh, look at this. France has the longest running data on this, and then the US. Wow, so that is quite something. Starting from 1900, almost nobody smoking. Peaking in the 70s, by the looks of things. Or in the 60s. 11 cigarettes per person per day in the US. And now it's all the way down to 3. So that is pretty impressive. Smoking rates now falling in almost all countries. So what happened that's so successfully around smoking, and can we emulate it for meat eating? Hey, Race Lever, how's it going? Nice to see you. Measure it by if we don't destroy everything, including us, before we become moral enough to live in real peace, then we're moving fast enough as a group, but too slow for those left in the wake. Yeah, I mean, somebody commented on my Mr. Beast having cultivated meat video. Like, we're running out of time to actually make the right choice for the right reasons. I think it is a really interesting time. Like, we have only been doing factory farming for fewer than 100 years. And we ain't going to be doing it for another 100 years if we play our cards right. So now it's like, are you going to be one of the people who stood up at the time when it was easy to partake in factory farming and said, no, this is wrong, I'm not going to be a part of this? Or are you going to be one of the people who's like dragged out of it by eventually it becoming illegal, or just the wind blowing us away? Affordability of cigarettes. Why am I only getting one? Why am I only getting Togo here? Let's do United States. So what's the metric here? Price of 100 packs of cigarettes as a share of GDP per capita. Okay. Alright, this only goes back to 2012. And I guess there's a slight increase. What a weird metric, hey? There's a slight increase in the price of cigarettes in the UK, although in the US it's pretty flat. But again, it's only back to 2012, so who knows? Bans on tobacco advertising. Well, this is a big part of it, I guess. Look at that, the US. One of the only places where there's no bans. And Indonesia as well. There's Indonesia. That's one of the only countries where smoking's still going up. It's still allowed to be advertised. This is partial ban. There's almost no one answering to that. Some additional bans, complete ban. Oh, that's interesting. The UK is not in the complete ban camp. I would have thought that we would be. Oh, Russia, more progressive than us in this sense. And Mexico and Brazil. Interesting. Oh, and look, we can see how that changes over time. What? Is it me or did nothing change there? Alright, I guess that didn't work. Support to help quit smoking. Well, this could be pretty informative to have a look at in terms of like what we might do. And of course, we just saw Amsterdam banning meat adverts in public spaces. Do you think there's a possibility factory farms will continue for another 100 years? Honestly, since we read that AI thing the other day, I think it could go either way. Most of those AI future scenarios were, no, there won't be factory farms in 100 years. But there was one or two which were like, we might be a decade away from ever being able to quash it, right? If everything gets AI-ified to the point where activists can't do anything anymore. But yeah, that means that the time we have now is incredibly high expected value one way or the other. Now is the time to put your foot in the gas in terms of activism, giving to effective animal organizations, sharing pro-animal content, trying to win the argument. Because in 10 years' time we might have AGI, and in that case, well, there's a number of things that could happen from there. My sanity, I often try to mostly watch good news, so what I had in mind is probably less than 40 years the whole world would accept lab-grown meat or oppose or shut down factory farms. Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I hope that cultivated meat gets there. I hope that veganism continues to move in the right direction. But honestly, Vegan 2.0 is the only way that we're going to make that happen. Vegan 2.0 consists in directing resources to the effective organisations that can bring about the non-factory farming future. And again, they've got such modest resources at the moment that if we can get all the vegans to realise this, we can double the animal movement's resources and we can completely change the game. I wish that I could just pump Vegan 2.0 into the brain of every vegan. And if we're able to successfully do that, then yeah, I think we're shutting the whole thing down, like, within 10 years. But it's a big if. You know what I noticed? On the vegan subreddit, I don't know if I'm just salty because my Vegan 2.0 stuff is sometimes not well received there. But the upvoted stuff, if you go on the vegan subreddit and look at top posts this week, this month, and so on, the things which rise to the top are not that helpful for animals. They're just not. And I noticed this, a lot of people are like commenting really disparaging things about Ricky Gervais when I posted the thing about well done Ricky Gervais for giving a load of money to animal charities. Same too when I posted my Mr. Beast cultivated meat video on there, like a load of comments. I say a load of comments, only like 5 comments on it, but it gets downvoted and then people are commenting like, oh, I don't support cultivated meat and stuff like this. It's so fucking infiltrated. You know, there's that AMA where somebody said I was employed by a meat industry lobbyist to kind of post on the vegan subreddit and everything else. The things that I think there's a decent chance, as that person said in their post, that there are more meat industry plants than actual vegans there now. Because if you look at the things that get upvoted and are allowed to rise to the top, they're very fucking marginal things like, oh, they've reintroduced milk powder into a product that I used to like, and like, oh, it's really hard being vegan around my family and shit like this. Like, it's so, I mean, don't get me wrong, there are some vegans posting that kind of stuff and having, struggling with those experiences and so on, but that ain't helping many animals. It's just not. If anything, the things which tend to rise to the top in the vegan subreddit are things which kind of make veganism seem like a pain in the arse. And if you go in there and post something like, hey, I know how we can fucking bring the whole thing down in the next 10 years, we need to promote effective donations to animal charities, and we need to promote alternative proteins, and we need to promote organised activism, people downvote, people poo-poo it. Stuff which will make a real difference for animals is not allowed to do well there. I think it's absolutely symptomatic of the subreddit being infiltrated by anti-vegans and meat industry shills. Like, they will not allow any momentum to get in onto stuff which is actually going to help animals. It's really on us to promote Vegan 2.0 and fucking push it hard, because this is the only way that we're going to get there for animals. This is the only way that we're going to bring down factory farming. If all of us put our shoulder to the wheel, put our hands in our pockets, speak up, organise, this is the only way that we're going to do it. You know that's true. You know that's true. We're not going to get there by ever more perfectly avoiding milk powder and crisps. We're going to get there by funding effective animal organisations. We're going to get there by consistently making the case in public and sharing pro-animal content. And we're going to get there by organising and influencing governments and corporations towards pro-animal policies. And if we do that consistently, like I said, if all of the vegans in the UK gave £15 a month, we would more than double the animal movement's resources. More than double. That's nuts, guys. £15 a month. Where or how would you recommend spreading Vegan 2.0? It's a good question. Post about it. Post my video called Upgrade to Vegan 2.0 is, I think, a good introduction to the concept. I might make an updated version of that, actually, because I've really upgraded my whole setup here with a microphone and everything. Like probably I'll do this on stream sometime, is go through my old videos and like we can all have a bit of a cringe together about the low production quality when I started out. But my video Upgrade to Vegan 2.0, I would send that to as many vegans as you can. Clip up stuff from the stream if you know how to do that. Like, feel free to clip up anything that can be put into the short videos. I do it sometimes and make shorts of like stream segments, for example. But it's just a capacity issue. Like, I don't always have time to make all of the clips that I would want to, but they are the things that can go viral. The merch, I do think the merch is very good. I wore my Vegan 2.0 cap the other day and people were asking me about it, and I'm able to bring it up and tell them about it. And people, non-vegans included, are very sympathetic to this approach. We've got to push hard on making Vegan 2.0 a thing. And I intend to put some resources into doing that, but I'm not quite sure how to do that at the moment. I bought a load of subscribers when I first started the YouTube channel, but that has really not worked. I think if anything, backfired. I read that when you have a load of subscribers who don't interact with your shit, it actually puts you down the algorithm, because it signals that people are not interested in interacting with it. Is the merch vegan materials and vegan ink? Yes, it's not. There's no wool stuff in there. I did check that. So their caps and the t-shirts and everything like that, 100% cotton. So there's not non-vegan products in there. I think the merch is based. I'm gonna get my hat. Come on, tell me that's not based as hell. So, guys, I mean, honestly, and look, you know that this is correct. Did I check the ink? No, I didn't check the ink. You know that this is correct. The way to do it is going to be funding effective animal movements, effective animal organisations, pushing pro-animal content to people that we know in social media, inviting other vegans into Vegan 2.0, making them aware of it, making the case for Vegan 2.0, and organising through things like the Fast Action Network. This is the way that we can do it. All of these things are shown to work. Let me show you another... Let me show you another thing that's going to encourage you on terms of the social media posting. This is survey results from 13,000 vegans. What was the first thing that made you seriously consider going vegan? Most common thing is documentaries, 22%. Second most common thing at 17%, 1 in 6 vegans. Conversation with a friend or family member. So talk about it and talk about Vegan 2.0. Get people in on this and we need to grow the movement. There's 3 people in it right now. Race Lever, I would love that. Vegan 3.0, I would love that. I'm here for it. So look, 1 in 6 from a conversation with a friend or family member, and then 13%, so this is like 1 in 8, 1 in 8 basically, post on social media. Plus 14% here, a video on the internet other than a feature-length documentary. So I'm thinking that a lot of that's probably via social media also. So all told, like, this is nearly half from social influence. This is getting people to go vegan. We need to get more people going vegan 2.0. If we can get all of the vegans in the UK to give £15 a month, we can fucking double the resources of the animal movement. And that's not even talking about the Americans, by the way. All right, or any other nations you may be watching, right? All welcome. But this can be game changing. We can get more people like Edie fighting for pro animal laws. We can get more of this stuff that we know works. Right, this is the share more. We've got cage-free eggs, our world and data, here we go. This is the do more, right, the organised campaigns in the Humane League's Vast Action Network. Look at this, in the UK, 1996, 30 years ago, 12% of eggs were from non-cage systems, from cage-free systems. And it's just gone up and up and up. And now it's 72% of eggs. And now we're going to make the whole thing illegal with the new changes to the law. I'm going to put this consultation in the chat again. This is open until March 9th. Here's your chance to make a massive change in the UK. Feel free to share this doc around. Feel free to copy-paste the answers that I've written here. Here's the link to the consultation. It takes less than 10 minutes to fill it out if you're copying these answers. Being organised and doing stuff like that. We know this stuff works, right? We've been doing it. Here's the increase of the cage-free eggs. Here's almost half of people having been influenced by conversations and or stuff on the internet and social media. And then animal charity evaluators, charities. Do you have any vids or thoughts on frontline vegan activism effectiveness? I worry that could backfire. Based Oppenheimer, I knew you'd be there. I knew you'd be on it. There's a hero. Get on it, guys, if you haven't already, the cage-free consultation. Yeah, good question, Bruff and Dust. And welcome, by the way. I haven't seen you here before. Thoughts on frontline vegan activism? Well, you know what I'm not seeing in this graph is mention of having been influenced by frontline vegan activists. That's not evidence that it doesn't work. But if it was a major factor, you would probably expect to see it more represented here. Let's actually see, because they have a breakdown of the other section here. Oh, here you go. Oh no, that's within the challenge thing. Okay. All right, well, recommended by an activist. So some small percentage of the people who were some small percentage of the people in each of these were recommended by an activist, right? Recommended the video by a public activist, 1.7%. Oh, look at this. We've got some of the top YouTubers that people cited. Vegan Gains YouTube video, 17 people. Mike the Vegan, 17. Joey Carbstrong, 16. That Vegan Couple, 15. Ellen Fisher, 14. YouTuber Kalel, I don't know that person. Well, look, here's some evidence that activists are doing something. But I mean, this is not looking at the possibility that it might backfire, to be fair. Do you think it might be somewhat ineffective if multiple people are giving the same responses? Yeah, good question, Oppenheimer. There is a note that... So basically they will all be counted, but they'll kind of be counted as part of a campaign. It's not quite clear how that influences it one way or another. If you do have it in you to make your own original responses, then, good on you and do that. And feel free, of course, to... What you could do is copy-paste my responses here into ChatGPT, for example, and get just like rewording so that it doesn't trick the censors or whatever. But you are allowed to, there will be animal organizations who are doing like campaign responses like this, where everyone's giving the same responses. So it will still be counted. But yeah, you can increase the impact further if you are doing it, if you're doing original responses as well. Laws work. Prohibition of alcohol just made speakeasies thrive in alcohol and stronger alcohol. Need to change hearts and minds. Yeah, that's true, Race Lever. I mean, we do need to change hearts and minds in any case because, of course, as we're seeing, right, a lot of the legal route is dependent on people supporting it. And ultimately, like she was talking about Labour rowing back on the picking up chickens by the legs thing. If, in the situation where we have won many more hearts and minds, they would know that they're going to be more likely to be punished for that politically. Whereas in the situation where we have not won very many hearts and minds, they know that they can pretty much get away with doing that. So you do need public support to ensure that the laws get made and enforced. But yeah, absolutely the laws are important. And even though she's saying in many cases they're not enforced, like having them on the books creates these opportunities for future enforcement. So yeah, but I mean, a major thing that we need is just more funding for effective animal organisations. That's why the giving more part of Vegan 2.0 is so important. Because, I mean, think about it. Like, if you want to get anything done in your own life, very often the best way of doing that is to pay a professional to do it. If I want to travel to London, I'm going to pay a professional to drive a train there for me, right, via buying a train ticket. If I want something done in my house, I'm like the least handy person ever, so I'm definitely going to get a handyman in, and they're going to do a much better job than I could because they're a professional and they know how to do it and they've been doing it their whole life and so on. It absolutely makes sense in the case of animal advocacy. Like, if we have a well-funded professional animal advocacy movement, it's just a matter of time. And if we don't, then it's a matter of forever. But yeah, we've got to spread the Vegan 2.0. And by the way, again with the merch, I've got my hat here, I've got my mug here. All of the profits from the merch are going to effective animal charities. I'm not making any money off of this, so shilling a little bit, but it's really is to raise money for charity, but mainly it's so that we spread the concept of Vegan 2.0. That's going to be the way more important thing than, the few quid of profit going to a charity from purchases. So, yeah, that's one of the ways of advertising this. I'm going to think about other ways that we can potentially do it. We need to, again, if all of the vegans in the UK were giving £15 a month to effective animal charities, or for animal charities, right, to farmed animal charities, we would fucking more than double the movement's resources. That is huge. That is keep that in your mind, right? Because if we can spread the concept of vegan 2.0, I know that you guys believe me. I know that you guys know that this is the way that we're going to actually scalably make a difference for animals. And I will do an update on the vegan 2.0 video. But in the meantime, spam my upgrade to vegan 2.0 video to anyone who might not have seen it. And I will make a more compelling version of that in the future as well. I'll tell you what as well, one big thing, this is the last thing I'll say, we'll go back to watching the video. One big thing that I have always low-key hoped that people would take from my channel in particular is you can just start doing stuff imperfectly. And again, we'll one day we'll go and watch my early videos and see how bad the lag on the camera and how shitty the mic is and all the rest of it, and be inspired that like you don't need to wait to be perfect at something before you do anything, right? You don't need to be Earthling Ed with the what are we on, 160p 4K video and the professional podcast studio and everything else. Start doing things imperfectly and keep doing them, and over time that is gonna be what improves you as well. Like my main thinking with starting doing it imperfectly was, of course, that's my only option, right? You can't start doing something perfectly. You don't have that option. So start giving whatever you can and think about how you can increase it, and start sharing things as modestly as you can. And maybe you're not getting really very many likes, and you can start to notice like the best times to post it, or the best groups to share it in, or whatever it may be. Spreading, as you know, Raisley, the real vegan 3.0 is spreading vegan 2.0, right? That's fucking vegan cubed, okay? Spam isn't vegan, true. Based. We can get there, guys. We can really, really get there. Vegan 2.0 is the only way. Right, let's finish this, eh?
The financial backing to be able to enforce. But is there also the idea that we need to empower enforcers to feel like they'll be supported? You know, outside of just enforcers, whistleblowers as well. Mm. Is there a sort of changing of the attitude around enforcement and whistleblowing, which means that we need to embolden these people to actually feel like their voice will be heard? Because part of me has some sort of sympathy.
Yes, but vegan 4.0, true. Honestly, if people come up with better iterations on the kind of things that I'm talking about, I would fucking love it. I would love to see vegan 3.0 and 4.0 and 5.0. If these really are ways of helping more animals and spreading it further, this is it's what we need. It really is.
I think about maybe enforcers on fishing vessels or enforcers in slaughterhouses going into these environments, being surrounded by a group of...
You know, I said this is the last thing I'll say, and then I'm on one now. What the animal industries really, really don't want us to do, the animal industries don't really mind if, you know, between 1% and 5% of people are boycotting their products. They don't really care, right? They've still got 95% of people are giving them money. When you're vegan 1.0, you're not really hurting them. Okay, you're refusing to help them, but you're really not proactively doing anything to bring the system down. What the animal industries absolutely don't want us to do and cannot abide is if vegans organize, get our shit together, fund effective organizations that are going to rage against this machine, spread the word that this is what we're doing now, and organize to put pressure on big companies and governments. That the livestock industries cannot abide by that. Race Lever just powered up to infinity vegan. True! Power levels overwhelming.
People who know each other, who are bonded around the job that they're doing. And you're kind of like the snitch in the midst, in the midst. You're the one who's got to keep an eye out on them, get them into trouble. And so there's a natural wariness between them and you, and you kind of feel sort of immediately on your own in that environment. Is part of enforcement also about the emboldening of these people so that they know that if they make a claim, if they write something down, if they film something, if they report something that's illegal, they will actually be backed and not just ostracized from their workplace and from the industry that they're sort of part of?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that there's probably several ways that you could go about that. You could ensure that they are sufficiently resourced, that they do, that the culture in whatever organization they're working for does support their role. But on top of that, I actually think it kind of comes back to what we're saying about that necessary shift and the law meaning something in practice. If we're able to get to that place, if we're able to kind of get that message through to people and through to the relevant regulators that the law needs to mean something in practice, hopefully that shift will also do something in that situation. And in fact, the shame should be on the person that's done the wrong act and not the person snitching, Right. And that's what we need to see happen. We need it to be that they're the ones that should be embarrassed that they've done that, not the person that's whistleblowing or enforcing the law.
There is and it speaks to what you were saying before, sort of a more all-encompassing nature to this. It isn't just these isolated things in a vacuum. The laws that we have in certain areas can also impact how laws are created in other areas, or how attitudes are shifted in other areas as well. And I think as a vegan community, and I myself I'm guilty of this, sometimes I think we get so frustrated with animal welfare because we see these sort of micro changes and we think, but this isn't the big thing that we want. This is such a small thing. We want the abolition. We want these things to be made. We want there to be a law that says farming animals is illegal, not changing how we deal with that. But actually, if the end goal is something closer to abolition, which is what I would want, and I know vegans in general want, but there is the argument that actually these steps in that direction are so impactful because they add up to something bigger than just the laws themselves. And this sort of all or nothing approach to animal welfare or animal legislation can actually be self-defeating because it stops us from making these positive steps in the right direction. And
fucking so true. This is what I was saying earlier about the divide between abolitionists and welfarists is completely artificial and bollocks. And I'm pretty sure that's a psyop, by the way, guys. I'm pretty sure that that's a psyop. The abolitionists versus the welfarists, like anti-welfarism is the dumbest thing. It's like saying, I'm not going to go to the gym today because I won't have a six-pack tomorrow. Like, all we have is incrementalism. And yes, exactly as Ed's saying here, right, he's an abolitionist ultimately, but that doesn't preclude having good positive steps on the way to do with welfarism. I think that largely the PSYOP's been defeated. I think that most people are in support of welfare improvements now and understand that that's a good thing and a step in the right direction. And also, again, as I said, I think that most people advocating for welfare improvements, they are ultimately abolitionists as well, right? Some of them may or may not be in a position to say that out loud, right? Because some of them may be playing the game. You can't necessarily say in a negotiation, hey, by the way, if you give me this welfare improvement, I'm not going to be happy. I'm going to be back here tomorrow asking for something else, right? Because that's you're undermining your argument and your position, right? So people might not be in a position to say that, but all of these are steps in the right direction, like obviously. So yeah, I don't know. I don't come across too many vegans who are like anti-welfarism these days, I don't think. But if you do, tell them they're wrong, I guess.
And even if it is something like an updating of animal welfare, which on paper we might go, that's not what we want, it still means something because it has an impact in terms of how consumers engage with the industry. It has an impact in terms of how the industry itself has to pay for certain...
Like the stream, guys, if you didn't already, drop a like, drop a share. Very important that we recruit more vegan 2.0s.
And welfare changes. All of these things have a positive knock-on effect. And I think that sometimes the legal aspect of things is overlooked because the legal change we want is one that's not within our grasp right now. Mm-hmm. But to get there requires us to take all of these steps that...
Yeah, but Race Lever, to get to abolition, you've got to get something closer to abolition first, right? I know what you're saying. But yeah, you can't discount any steps in the right direction. You got to support it. All we have is incrementalism, right?
That you're currently taking, and others like you work in this field are currently taking.
Yeah, I think that that's what history is showing to be the case. That has been the direction of travel from those very early animal welfare laws. And yes, you mentioned that there's more, harm towards animals now than perhaps there was back then. But I do, that there's so many variables as to why that is. But the reality is that the public's perception towards animals has grown significantly throughout that history as well, and the compassion towards animals has as well. So I think that absolutely that these laws, changing these laws, no matter how small they may seem or how far away from whatever anyone's ultimate goal is, I think that each individual law does mean something in practice for various reasons. The very straightforward reason of making sure that the animal is treated.
Yeah, I don't think so, Race. I don't think that's how it works. Race Lever says, got to be careful with incrementalism. It can work against abolitionism by making people feel just comfortable enough with their bad habits to continue them. I don't think that's how it works on aggregate. There might be cases where that's how it works, but the evidence that I've seen, where have I written about this? Vegan Society. This one. People looking for humane label or free range instead of going vegan doesn't really solve the problem. It is a step in the right direction. It really is. It really is. Because we're making the worst practices, and by the way, the cheapest to do practices, less and less feasible. Where's the concern, maybe? I'm not going to be able to find this now. Media is in the media section. Basically, the punchline is that people... Here we go. Some animal rights campaigners may be concerned about bringing attention to particularly cruel farming practices in the media, since this could give the message that animal exploitation would be permissible under better conditions. However, there is good evidence that media coverage of corporate or legislative welfare reforms decreases consumption of animal products. Lusk found that coverage of the Proposition 2 in California, which banned cages for egg-laying hens, decreased demands for caged eggs and increased demand for cage-free eggs. Whilst the overall demand did not change in this case, Tonsor and Olnick found that the media coverage about chicken and pig welfare decreased demand for pork and poultry over 10 years. More recently, Mercy for Animals tested this experimentally, again finding that reading about corporate policy reform or legislative reform, which improved animal welfare, decreased intentions to buy the relevant animal products. Moreover, Fauna-Lytics found that 73% of the public support using media to reach the public. Okay, so that's not that right. But yes, so there's a couple of studies here where when there's media coverage or when people are exposed to messages about welfare improvements, it translates into decreased demand for those particular animal products, not increased demand. So yeah, I think that welfare improvements are good for that reason also.
A bit better in that situation, through to the more kind of abstract idea of shifting perceptions and relationships with animals. All of that does kind of pave the way for bigger change.
Absolutely right. And just to sort of reinforce that point of
well, like I said, Race Lever, we don't have the big green button. We don't have, if you have the big green button that says Vegan World Now, let me know and I'll press it. But if, in the absence of that, then all we have is incrementalism. So the choice isn't that if we decrease, we're not going to end. It's like, if we don't decrease, we're probably just going to do nothing or maybe increase. Right. So absent the big green button, I'm afraid incrementalism is all we've got.
The legal system versus the number of animals. We also have more vegans now than we did 200 years ago. So it is this case that there is sort of two parallels that exist sort of simultaneously, where there is a lot of progress being made, but clearly that progress has been made.
Me getting one guide, but it's okay because there is in fact only one guy.
Alongside an increasing in the problem in certain ways. But part of the point is that hopefully you reach a plateau where then all the progress that we're making and the changes that are happening in the many ways that they are start to have an impact in a way that means that we reach peak meat, let's say, and start to see a change in those attitudes. So it is a process, and I think part of the vegan experience is living in a state of uncomfortableness where we are deeply passionate about this issue. Not just this issue, many issues, of course. There are so many.
I don't know, Race Lever, what is the cost? I think, all we can do is move things in the right direction. So if we are able to move things in the right direction, then that's all we can do.
Problems in the world. And as a consequence, you have to live in a world where you are constantly going against the grain, and you are also constantly having to face the reality and of the situation in front of us. And I think that can be a really heavy burden at times. But that's why focusing on the positives is so vital, and taking these wins and championing these things that are occurring is so vital. And I think that updates in the law, whether that's to do with enforcement, interpretation, or just new legislation being passed, these are all victories which should embolden us to feel confident about the direction of travel, even if we know we can constantly remind ourselves that there are so many problems in the world. There's this emboldening that can happen as a consequence of changes occurring around us. And I think it's really vital for us as a community and as a movement to always remind ourselves of the positive things that are happening, because otherwise you end up in the shadow of the Goliaths that we're facing and feeling completely disheartened. But actually there is something that is happening as well, which I think we can cling on to and be, that creates a sense of optimism and hope for the future. Anyway, I believe that. And I do think that the way that we interpret laws and enforce laws.
Yeah, again, Race Lever, I don't think it's helpful to think about like dividing the animal movement up, and the abolitionists and the welfarists want to take credit. Like, we all want the same things ultimately. It's not helpful for us to be dividing up like that, I don't think.
Laws will be a huge thing moving forward. So thank you for your work.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you
for yours too.
Well, you're very kind. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It's been really insightful for me, because this is an area that I've not explored too much. It's not an area that my work normally covers. So it's really great to gain an insight into that, to hear about some of the things that have been happening, what you've been working on, and hopefully what you'll be able to continue working on long into the future as well. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed this episode. Just a reminder that I am now over on Substack, and I'm posting weekly articles about different topics related to veganism and animal rights, including sharing my thoughts and feelings about living vegan in a non-vegan world. So if that sounds like something you might be interested in, or you'd like to support my work, then links to do so can be found in the description below. Once again, thank you so much for watching this episode.
Thank you so much, Ed. And thank you so much, everyone, for watching this episode of the Vegan 2.0 live stream. All right, I'm going to call it there. And you know what? In 2 minutes, my new video is about to drop. So lucky you. If you want more based Vegan 2.0 Chris Bryant content, head over to my channel at 6 o'clock. So in 2 minutes from now, that new video is going to drop. It's actually already available to members of the channel. So if you're not already a member, if you care to, you can get early access to some videos. And I won't be holding anything back from non-members, so you will get it all eventually. But there you go. If you want to see that, then head on over now. It's my interview with the founder of this, Meat Alternatives, Andy Shovel. And it's a good conversation, so I recommend checking it out. Thank you so much for watching, you guys. Race Lever, don't you dare pull me back in. No, I don't think there really are people who are fine with killing their animals humanely. I think that they are, as Edie is in this conversation, saying like, it's better, it's not, that doesn't mean that it's fine. Hey, Indef, nice to see you. You just missed me. But fortunately, my new video is about to drop. My interview with Andy Shovel is just about to come out. It's coming out right now, actually. So go. Check it out on my channel. Yeah, nice to see you, Indef. Sorry to miss you this time. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate you guys. And listen, rewatch this stream because there was some. I feel like I did some good rants in here. I'm gonna have to download them, clip it up for the shorts for the algo. Thanks for watching, you guys, and keep spreading the word of Vegan 2.0. This is the way that we're gonna change the game for animals. This is the only way. If we're funding the effective organisations, if we're putting in the effort to organise and communicate to governments and big companies, and to share things, spreading the word about veganism and about veganism 2.0. Become a vegan 3.0. Spread the word about vegan 2.0. Become a vegan 4.0 and spread the word about vegan 3.0. Appreciate you, Poe. Appreciate you, Race Lever, In Def. Really, Al Oppenheimer. All the greats were here. All the best ones. I appreciate you guys a lot. Take care.